Who do I have on the telephone lines?
Ryan Jacobs.
Got to keep telling yourself.
Welcome, Ryan.
Nothing is good.
Do I have anyone else on the lines? This is Trustee Jacobs. Okay, well, welcome, Trustee Jacobs. I'd like to welcome everyone to the regular meeting, April 25th, 2018, our public session, and ask us to stand for the singing of O Canada.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. Quand embrasser, porter les pères, il sait porter la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Just a little observation.
What I'll do is I'll get you to do roll call. Okay, Director, I'm going to ask you to do roll call, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, trustees. This is our roll call for our meeting of 25 April 2018. Trustee Armour.
Present.
First Vice Chair Karkner.
Present.
Trustee Cram.
Present.
Trustee Jacobs.
Present.
Trustee Wendy McPherson.
Present.
Trustee Bill McPherson.
Present.
Trustee McAllister. Second Vice Chair McDonald.
Present.
Chair McMillan.
Present.
Trustee Richards.
Present.
Trustee Swan sends her regrets. Student Trustee Marshall Wilson.
Present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have quorum.
Thank you, Director. Before we get into the meeting, first that I want to talk about is for us really to sit back and reflect on the terrible incident that happened in Toronto. There are no words to describe, and when those kind of things happen, it's hard to imagine what's going through the mind of the individual involved. Even more difficult to be able to imagine the pain and the suffering of the families that were affected. So just for a second, just put them in your thoughts and in your prayers. It's not something that we are used to in Canada. I hope we never have to face something like this again, but I just want to send on behalf of the board our condolences and our sincere thoughts. The second thing that I want to talk about is last Friday we were in Roebuck at the Student Senate, and we had 4 excellent candidates for student trustee that came forward. We listened to their speeches, and I know I can speak on behalf of all the trustees that were there, just how incredibly proud we were of the young people in that room, those 4 people that were presenting, but not just the 4 in the room, all of the student senators that were there. The questions that were asked, the level of discussion throughout that makes you stand back and say, you know, as a school board, we're doing something right when we have those kind of students speaking on behalf of all students. So I was very proud of to be a part of that. Out of the Student Senate, they voted for the student trustee who will be taking Marshall's place beginning, I believe it's August? In August 1st. And we're very fortunate to have her here, and I would like just to draw your attention to the back of the room, to Bushra Kadra, and I'm going to, I want to say I went and got these. So I'm going to say I went and got these. Welcome to the board. And Bushra is from Brockville, BCI, and it's been a long time since we've had a Brockville trustee. And so welcome, and we look forward to working with you. And as I was saying at Student Senate, you're in a unique position that happens it happens just every 4 years, where you'll be sitting where Marshall is right now, and there will be a new board switch over in the beginning of December. So it's a very unique position because you'll be one of the ones that we know for sure is going to be sitting at this table. So welcome, and we look forward to working with you. It's always nice to look back at the back and see one of our former trustees, student trustees, and Grace. It's always great to have you here. Finished your first year. I understand you did well, and today you got a job for the summer. Perfect. So thanks for coming back and seeing us. It's always great to have you here. Okay. I need a motion that the Upper Canada District School Board approve consent agenda item 3.02 to 3.03, April 25th, 2018, as submitted. Can I get a mover? Trustee McAllister, seconded by Trustee Richards. I ask you to cast your votes, please.
I vote in favor. I just want my
Okay, thank you. That carries. Thank you very much. Trustee Armour, you're in favor?
Of course, sure.
Thank you. Do we have any conflict of interest declarations? Seeing there are none, I want to move forward to a report of the board from private session. So report to the board from the private session April the 11th, 2018, at the committee of the whole meeting in private, April the 11th, 2018. One personnel matter and one litigation matter was discussed. No recommendations were brought forward to the board. Okay, so we're going to move on to our first delegation. This is Cornwall Collegiate Vocational School, and they're going to talk about their improvement plan for student achievement and wellness. I'm going to turn this over to Superintendent Mills, who's going to introduce everyone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's my pleasure to welcome the administration from CCVS to the board table tonight. On my far left here is Vice Principal Tracy Armstrong, who recently was appointed at the beginning of second semester, and Tracy brings a lot of experience in literacy, working in program, and also as an elementary teacher. To her left is Vice Principal Marty Detman, and Marty joined us in Upper Canada at the beginning of this year from Peel, and he was a secondary math teacher. So you can see the literacy math combination there, which is nice. And then further in the middle here, a veteran principal has been to the table many times, Principal Chris Boulay. CCVS is it's arguably the oldest school in Ontario, depending on who you talk to. Rich history and tradition. We have a proud history of diversity there with our partnership and tuition agreement with AMBE, a number of first, second, and third generation new Canadians. And a few weeks ago, Viscount Alexander, which is a feeder school, was presented to the board, or presented at the board, and we talked about the diversity there, and it's similar in terms of the numbers, which you'll see. It's a comprehensive school, lots of programs both in the building and outside, and I know you'll be impressed with the message you get tonight. So I'll turn it over to Principal Boulay.
Thank you, Superintendent Mills, trustees, superintendents, and gallery. It's my pleasure to represent CCVS. Mr. Mills spoke glowingly of CCVS already, so that'll allow me to condense my 30-minute presentation.
I was going to say that.
In all seriousness, when I speak of CCVS on behalf of our admin team and our families and our community, I beam with pride. I beam with pride about the demographic and the population we serve. I beam with pride about our history, our tradition, but I also speak glowingly about the challenges that we embrace that lie in front of us, and that I hope to capture some of the challenges that lie ahead, both within the short term and long term, that CCVS, that we continue to work towards increasing student achievement results, as well as improving our graduation rate. As Mr. Mills has said, we're a very composite school in downtown Cornwall, Ontario. We serve approximately 700 students from the city of Cornwall, as well as Akwesasne. We have approximately 170 to 180 grade 7-8 students, with the balance in grades 9 to 12. We have a demographic that we serve that have needs, and that we continue to support through Champions for Kids to make sure that our kids feel connected, safe, well, and that they belong both at school and in our community. CCVS is definitely steeped in tradition. Established in 1806. My understanding is that it's the longest continuously operating public school in Ontario, third oldest across Canada. But again, I think it depends on the history books that we read. We have a number of alumni in our community, both recent alumni and past alumni, that I think are paying very close attention to the exciting times ahead with regards to the proposed new high school in the city of Cornwall. When we focus on the work that's ongoing, we do need to pay attention to the results of the last 3 to 5 years, as well as plan a path for improvement. And so, looking over our results, you will notice a tremendous amount of red, but also areas that we're bordering on levels 3, 4, as well as some good results in mathematics for our academic stream. I want to comment a little bit about the literacy results over the past 2 to 3 years. While we've seen scores in the mid-50s and 60s for level 3-4 students, the work has been ongoing in the last 2 years on-site through both our professional learning team focused on literacy, reading and writing strategies, but also we've supported our learners through our student success team with intense preparation throughout the entire school year in order to prepare our students for the very important right that happens every spring. We've already begun looking at preparing our grade 9 students for the grade 10 literacy test already. This just today, we had our grade 9 students write a preparation assessment in order for us to obtain diagnostic measures to allow us to plan ahead for next year. In 16-17, we did have a decrease in the number of deferrals of kids that wrote the literacy, and over a 3-year span, we essentially halved the number of deferrals of students writing the literacy test. The deferral number had an impact on the results. That said, we need to improve our results of our learners that are achieving at level 3-4, and it is an ongoing focus. And I have full confidence with the plan that we have in place that over time we'll have sustainable results that we'll be able to celebrate together. In mathematics, CCVS does have a large cohort of learners scoring at the level 2 level in applied. Approximately, we have 50% of our students, thereabouts, who wrote the applied assessment in the 16-17 school year who were at level 2. So while our results for last school year are at 30, which is, again, too low, we do have a large cohort of students that we have strategies in place for to allow them to move a level, to increase our level of 30 to, at the very minimum, board and provincial average. In addition to that cohort, we also have a disparity in results in last school year where the students who wrote in the January assessment scored significantly lower than the students who wrote in the June assessment. If we're able to replicate the results as well as the strategies that led to the results in future years, which we will, we're going to outperform both the board and the province, and that I'm convinced of. Lastly, I did want to talk a little bit about credit attainment because the board, through the director's work plan and the trustee plan, is to improve our graduation rate. Excuse me. And over the last 2 years, we've spent a considerable amount of time focusing on, supporting, and then mentoring students in order that after the grade 9 year, that they all have 8 credits, and after the grade 10 year, that they would have 16. We've shown noticeable improvement and gains in credit attainment in the last 2 years of both our grade 9 and 10 learners, and that is something that's going to contribute in the long haul on the graduation rate for our senior students. At this point, I will gladly welcome Ms. Armstrong to talk a little bit about our literacy initiatives, as well as areas of focus and where we're headed with our professional learning team and the CIPSA literacy.
Thank you. Our literacy team consists of grades 7 to 12 teachers who have shown great ownership in the in-between work, so between our team meetings. I've had the pleasure to join that team since February. To begin the year, they established their goals using the released OSSLT questions to determine where the students' needs lie. And that was in relative to the target skills such as explicit questioning, implicit questioning, and making connections, those kinds of skills. We identified questions where there was at least a 10% discrepancy between our school and the board. So each cycle, you can see up there, I've kind of outlined the cycles, but each cycle we built the teacher capacity around literacy strategies. So teachers then applied these strategies in their classes, and then they would bring the student work, or the student evidence back to the meeting where we go over the student evidence and look at the student progress and where we need to go from there. For an example, in our cycle 2, we looked at pre-reading strategies. And we, again, sorry, I didn't mention because it was up there, but we were looking at inferencing, implicit questioning, and inferencing. And we chose pre-reading strategies to help support that. One of the strategies that we used was a concept sort, where vocabulary would be pulled from a text that the students hadn't read yet, and they would sort either with given parameters or without given parameters. This gave the students the opportunity to interact with the text before reading and to begin constructing meaning. At the next meeting, so they would go back to their classrooms and they would work with that strategy with their students, and then bring student evidence back so that we could look at their focus students and really get an idea of where they were at and whether or not it was helping and what our next steps would be. We saw an improvement in student understanding of the text through the depth of their answers. It's also important that I should mention that one of the teachers on our literacy team also is the SST teacher who works with the OSSLT groups in preparation for the OSSLT, and she also used the strategies that we were working on in our literacy team meetings, and she found a marked improvement in the depth of their answers as well. And I think I'm.
Thank you, Tracy.
Okay.
Marty will talk a little bit about our CIPSA as related to mathematics.
So as Superintendent Mills mentioned, I came from the Peel School Board. There were some slight differences between what we were doing there and what we're doing here, but there is a common theme. CCVS has in place a very strong program involving problem solving. So since I've been a part of the numeracy team, we've been working hard to co-construct pre-assessments in order to help students work on their problem-solving skills. This in turn will hopefully really benefit the grade 9 students in their EQAO. The thing that I really like about this board is that we have our grade 7 and 8 students present in the high schools. This was a difficult thing in Peel because we were separate. So finding those feeder schools and reaching out to them in order to work towards that common goal of improving grade 9 EQAO scores was difficult. I'm very excited to be part of CCVS and to work with teachers on this. So we've been collaborating on rich assessment tasks, and we're focusing on learning goals and success criteria. With those learning goals and success criteria posted in the classroom for students to see, they'll be able to, and they have been this year, able to see what they need to do in order to improve in mathematics. So it's with great excitement that I see what we do for the rest of this semester and how it blends into next year. We've been taking teachers, going into different classrooms and observing how teachers are instructing their students. We're providing constructive feedback for those teachers, and we're looking at focus students to see how they're doing on the assessments that have been given. From what we see so far, those focus students that we've been following for each teacher that's a member of the numeracy committee, the students are improving in terms of their problem-solving abilities. It's a slow process. It's not going to happen overnight, but I believe we can really make a difference in our numeracy results.
Thank you, Mr. Detman. Our next slide speaks about our wellness goal, as well as our focus on supporting student wellness, staff wellness, and our attention to well-being for all students in our building. We have a very well-established and very sound student support team that includes subject teachers, grade division teachers, SST leads, our guidance counselor, student support partner, our administration team, and we're a very open school. And so students readily approach caring adults to talk to us about either their need or a friend in need. And it's through this openness, this open line of communication, and their willingness to reach out for support that we continue to support our learners. Vice Principal Detman also leads Tell Them From Me team, and a teacher lead from our student success team is currently leading a cohort of student leaders on a process of truly gauging wellness in our building through the Tell Them From Me survey, but then more importantly planning next steps based on the results that they're going to see through the survey, but also in conversations that they have in our learning commons, our cafeteria, our hallways, and in our classrooms. Lastly, we have a link crew and web crew that are providing mentorship to our grade 7 and grade 9 students, and a continued area of growth for us at our school is to increase our capacity as adults to build resiliency and coping strategies for our student learners, so that when they do enter our building, we can focus on teaching and learning. Our last slide is, I think, our opportunity to beam with pride about our school. And I've listed just a few points that I'd like to speak to today. You know, CCVS is a school that provides pathways for all. We have a pathway for students entering post-secondary, college, university, apprenticeships. But in addition to those pathways, we also have a pathway for our learners who are in our life skills program, who we're preparing for life after school and our program in Cornwall Beyond 21. CCVS has also awarded well over $1 million in Batista scholarships since 1999 to students entering both university and college. We beam with pride when we talk about our Indigenous Student Leadership Group. Just today, a number of our students led a number of activities at our iLead Day. And we have a great relationship with Akwesasne Mohawk Board, as well as our staff support personnel from Akwesasne Mohawk Board who support our learners as well as our staff with our Indigenous students. We're a very, very diverse school. Well over 50 international students who walk our hallways, who lead our Raiders International Club. We're currently preparing our Multicultural Day, which will be in mid-May. And we're trying to start very small, but I know our teacher leader likes to go big. So I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of information about our students, their histories, their cultures, and their experiences. As well, a number of very, very diverse clubs, activities that we have for our students, whether it's sport, extracurriculars, diversity and equity club, so that every student can find their niche and their involvement and how they can be a Raider and then carry on as a contributing member in the Cornwall community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open up the comments and questions with your Trustee McDonald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. You heard Superintendent Mills talk about his pride. You heard the principal and vice principals talk about their pride in the school. I will reiterate my pride. CCVS has a long standing tradition and history in Cornwall, but it doesn't mean that they rest on their accolades. They continue to do good things, hard things, have difficult days, have great days, and meet the needs of kids. I think that I can speak for having attended many graduations. There's not many graduations that you would go to where you would see a mix of students graduating, whether they be new Canadians, Indigenous students, students who have gone through our system for 15 plus years. But I think the thing that stands out the most are those students who join us from Akwesasne, who cross the stage in their traditional dress. Some of those individuals take great pride in doing that, and some are very modest, and some are very, I guess, proud of the fact that they can wear the traditional dress, the headdress, everything that they have the opportunity to do that. So I think that's a tremendous opportunity for our students to be able to express themselves in a way that they see fit. I think when we look at schools present to us on a regular basis and we see results of EQAO, and we see the results in our color coding. And I think color coding is a good thing, don't get me wrong. But we see that we have red and yellow and green. And I think when we hear schools talk and acknowledge the fact that there is red and there is work to do, that goes a long way. That's credibility. That talks to the accountability of a school, and it talks to the work that the teachers and the staff have committed to. When we hear your discussion about the acknowledgement of the work that needs to be done and the goals being set, I think as a board we need to applaud that, and not just yourselves, but any school that does come before us. I'm appreciative of the fact that you addressed those concerns today of many in our community, in our board, around our board table. But I can tell you that, the marks are one thing, but the environment is another thing. This school is a remarkable environment. It does serve a diverse needs in our community. You walk into this school, and I've had the pleasure of knowing Mr. Boulay in many different roles in the city of Cornwall and as a principal in other schools. 700 students, Mr. Boulay knows every one of them. Every one of those students know Mr. Boulay. They know they don't want to see Mr. Boulay. He has earned a reputation of a no-nonsense principal, but a fair principal. A principal who will acknowledge your hard work as a staff member, your hard work as a student, but will hold you accountable. And I think that's the most that we could ask for of any of our principals, is that they're fair, they're honest, but they hold people accountable. And I think when we have those combinations in place, we can only have success. So I appreciate the work that you do, Mr. Boulay, and your staff on a regular basis. I hear it in the community on a daily basis from your staff, from your students, and from the parents that do have children that go to that school. It's a remarkable school, and I appreciate the work that you do to make it that way. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Open it up to more comments or questions. Trustee Cartner.
Thank you once again for your joint presentation. Most impressive. And I'm curious about the Indigenous students. Are there students in the school that are self-identified that do not live on Akwesasne?
Yes, there are.
Is it about equal, or?
No. We, through you, Chair McMillan, we have approximately 120 students from Akwesasne, and roughly 20 students who are self-identified in the city of Cornwall, off reserve.
Mm-hmm.
And those students are also involved in the leadership program that you have for the Akwesasne students?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, they are. Even and our students that are in grades 7 and 8 also have the opportunity to connect with our Indigenous support staff in our resource room and in our 9 to 12 panel, trying to make those connections as much as possible.
And they're non-identified students, is that right?
Self-identified students, not
just the self-identified.
off reserve.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Bill McPherson.
Yeah. Just a clarification, I guess, through the chair. Could you explain to me what the Batista scholarships are?
Through you, Chair McMillan, our Batista scholarships are dispersed through the Batista Foundation. So Dr. Artha Batista and his wife Anna left and bequeathed a large sum of money to be distributed in terms of scholarships on a yearly basis. And so every year we award 15 university-bound students a $4,000 award and 15 college-bound students a $3,000 award, and that's on a yearly basis.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee McAllister.
Good presentation, Principal Chris, and your cohorts there. It's obvious that you are employing many good strategies for improving student achievement and student wellness. I'd just like to look at the EQAO scores for a moment. I mean, I think what we're all trying to do is to go from red to yellow to green, and green to to purple, and that's the goal. I'm interested in the yellow. How many? Can you give me an idea as to how many of these students are close, like 2.8, 2.9, to the 3? No, which would put them in the green.
I am working from memory, Mr. Chair, but reviewing the data in preparation for tonight's meeting, with roughly 50% of our students that are at a level 2 in the applied math assessment specifically, roughly half of those students are above 2.5, which is why we believe, and our numeracy team believes, that we have an ability to impact results quickly and in the short term. And when I mentioned, through you, Mr. Chair, the results from last year's math applied assessment, if we were to simply look at the June results, we would have outperformed the board as well as the province. And so we believe we're well on track to replicating those results on a year-to-year basis. And it's through these sustained strategies and our focus and our SIPSA cycles that we're going to be able to maintain that.
Good, thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? Trustee Wendy McPherson.
Just one for understanding it, and it goes back to your scholarships. When it comes time for us to move, are the scholarships going to move with the school too? Or, because I know it's kind of a legacy thing there, but I was asked the question if they would. I assume they will move, but do we know what will happen to those?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll take that question. So as part of any transition, which would, in this case, be St. Lawrence and CCVS consolidating into the new build that will be in 5-6 years from now. Will be. And, that would be part of the transition committee looking at that, as well as us working with board staff who are responsible for the scholarships, as well as the family who was requesting.
Okay, thank you. Student trustee Wilson.
Wonderful presentation. I'm just curious about, you identified that there was a lot of extracurricular students can take place in, and I was curious about the level of student leadership in those extracurricular activities and clubs. So are the clubs predominantly run by staff, or is it students stepping up and taking leadership roles in the clubs, and just sort of that situation?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. We do have a blend of solid staff leaders. That goes without saying. However, in my experience over the last 2 years, the student leadership has stepped up to the plate in an incredible fashion. Whether it's leading our Rotary Interact Club, whether it's fundraising for Agape, which is our food bank in Cornwall, whether it's Raiders International, our student council. I've had multiple conversations just this week with a number of our students who are seeking my input with regards to planned activities in the month of May. And so when they approach me, they say, Mr. Boulay, can we have an activity day, fun day, a celebration day in the month of June? And they explain to me all the rationale, all their aspects that they've thought about. And I asked them, well, have you spoken to your student, your teacher advisor? And they said, well, we want to talk to you first, but this is what I think, they'll say yes. And I said, well, it's this well planned? I can imagine they'd say yes. And so in order to answer trustee's question, is that it's a blend. I think that in order for student leadership to rise to the top, we also need to have solid staff leadership, and that is something that we can count on each and every day at CCVS.
Thank you. Trustee McDonald.
I just wanted to ask a question, if you could expand or share some of the work that the students and staff do outside of the school in the community. A couple of art projects come to mind, but some other things, and if you just want to mention the art stuff.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair. Our Visual Arts Club, if we were able to clone our visual arts teacher and have a teacher like her in each and every school across Upper Canada, visual arts would be thriving in every corner of Upper Canada. And so we have our Apple Start tour, which happens in September. Our art club is involved in supporting Beyond 21. We just had a jail and bail event at the Cornwall Square in order to raise monies for Beyond 21. They decorated the jail. They have Christmas art tour. Every spring we have our art gallery at the Cornwall Public Library, which is widely attended by members of our community. And it's simply just a wow piece. Rotary Interact today, we're at the Agape Center touring the facility, but also bringing a donation of monies raised by our student leadership group at our school. Our student council are involved in many aspects, whether it's Comic-Con, which was held recently in Cornwall, but as far-reaching as a lot of our Salvation Army, Boys and Girls Club. We have, and I'm proud to represent the Boys and Girls Club as well. I'm on the board of their board of governors. But we have about 5 or 6 student leaders at our school alone that are either student leaders in their student mentorship group or our staff at Boys and Girls Club in the summertime. And so we have a number of great partnerships, both with our community partners, but it's meaningful partnerships that bring, I think, reward both to the students that are involved in the activity, but also for the community group itself.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Great presentation. I want to thank you very much. Marty, Tracy, thank you for coming. Chris, always a pleasure to have you here. Safe travels when you're heading back. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our second school tonight is Banbury Public School, and I'm going to ask Superintendent Mills to introduce Principal Mike Vincent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's my pleasure to welcome Principal Mike Vincent to the board table tonight. Principal Vincent is a veteran educator, many roles throughout the board in terms of administration, and he reminded me this evening that this is his last presentation to board because Mike is going on to his next pathway in June. I'm going to retire. Vanier, as a new superintendent to the Brockville family of schools, when you walk into Vanier, not knowing the school as an SO, it's the feel. So you immediately feel welcomed there. It's a comprehensive K-6 school in the northwest part of Brockville, with a lot of great instruction going on, staff that are embracing learning and transferring that on to their students and with their learning teams. And you're going to hear more of it tonight, and I think that will come through in the presentation. Is not that dissimilar to what you heard from CCVS, is how much is going on inside the building with the community coming in, but also how much is going on outside with the school going out to work and do things in the community. So, welcome.
Thank you, Superintendent Mills. Mr. Chair, Director, Trustees, Superintendents, thank you for inviting me to give you a little bit of information about Vanier Public School. As Superintendent Mills mentioned, we're an urban community school, open concept school. They have put up a few walls, I guess, since it was completely open concept. We're in north of Brockville, and we're a feeder school to TIS and BCI, more so to TIS than any other school. School was built in 1974. We have a population, well, when I did this presentation, it was 196, but now we're at 203. So we seem to register students in the spring, and they're outside of the board. So that's kind of cool that we have people moving in from outside the board. Starting in September, we'll be a dual-track school, beginning early French immersion in kindergarten. The numbers say that we'll have a French immersion kindergarten class and a core kindergarten class. So we have increased our classroom. So we'll have 9 homeroom classrooms starting next year. Our students come from a varied social economic background, but they're not diverse in what you call the cultural sense. We have a staff of 12 teachers, 2 ECEs, 5.5 EAs, 1 office administrator, 2 custodians, and myself. Please. Oh, you're doing the bottom. Sweet. This is my second year at Vanier, and when we looked at the EQO scores, at the primary end, we noticed that reading seemed to have some difficulties. And we knew of the difficulties in the junior end with the math. So last year, we tried to tackle reading by showing students how to do more complex reading responses. This year it's changed because we realized we can't do the reading responses without teaching them how to write properly. So this year's focus has been on writing. We would really like to take our level 2s and move them to closer to level 3. I can honestly say that with our grade 6 math, last year we had 5 to 6 that were above 2.5. So we have some work to do there. It's something that we've been working on for the last 2 years. We were identified as an intensive needs school by the ministry because of these EQAO results, and due to that fact, we've received extra resources in terms of OT costs so that we can put together learning teams. Our learning teams consist of all of our staff members in our school. There are 4 teachers on the primary literacy team, and there are 4 teachers on the math team. So I'm very grateful for the extra time and effort and money that we've received, because it allows me to do training with our learning partner on a monthly basis for every teacher in the school. We've been tackling the EQAO with this. We also send 2 teachers to the RMS days on every other month. I was lucky to send a junior teacher and a primary teacher last year, and they could share the results. And this year I was able to send 2 different ones. So now I have 4 experts from the RMS. I'll take some time and just see if I can expand on that with our SIPSA. One of the reflections with our primary group is they really notice the importance of oral communication. We have a lot of children that have speech language support, and our focus is to take the oral communication in kindergarten and get it to where they can respond in complete thoughts, and scaffold it through to grade 3 to where the students are writing in complete thoughts. So basically what we're doing is we're building vocabulary, we've got morning writing prompts, we have a consistent template for writing, except the degree of the template changes from kindergarten. It kind of like scaffolds. It gets more difficult as you move forward to grade 3. So a lot of it goes through modeling. The teachers model how to do the complete sentences and the complete thoughts, but they're adding in prompts now. In kindergarten, it's like they may add in something like "What do you mean by that?" or "Can you tell me more?" And they will do that orally. As they move up from grade 1 to 3, they start adding in prompts like, well, who does that, or what does that mean? So they're adding in the who, what, where, why, and how, to the point where, and by grade 3, they're hoping to be able to get full thoughts on paper, and then start looking at the conventions of writing. So that's where we're headed, and we're lucky enough to be able to do it from kindergarten right to grade 3 in our literacy. In our math, we found that improving the mental math computational strategy, it seemed to be a slow process. It just wasn't going as fast as we wanted it to. So we continue to work on a daily practice of number talk strategies in every junior classroom. We have reminders that students need to reread problems. We change the structure of the problem so that students can attack them from different ways. The success criteria in every classroom is the same. How the students attack or accomplish the success criteria is different. And on the success criteria, there's something about a growth mindset in every one of them, because we were finding that we're not getting anywhere with these children unless we can get them feeling comfortable about math. So as some of these examples of growth mindset would be thinking of a combination of solutions, taking a risk and not worried about making mistakes, and the big one I saw was stick to it. So even though these aren't tangible data type success criteria, they're success criteria that deal with a growth mindset. In terms of our wellness, SIP's a goal. As a group, we decided that we were going to build in calming time into the schedule, into every classroom schedule in the fall. So each classroom has calming time between 20 and 30 minutes throughout the day to work on calming strategies. And some of those strategies used in the classroom, some do yoga, some put on quiet music. There's a couple websites. One's called Cosmic Kids, where they'll put it up on the smart board, and the presenter will take the students through some mindfulness type activities. So that was we realized if we can't get them in the right frame of mind and we can't get them calm, then we're not teaching them anything. So we built that into every classroom schedule every day, the calming time. In terms of, we're very lucky to have an early act club, which is student-led at our school, and it's a chapter of Rotary Canada. And they break themselves up into three different committees. There's a school committee that deals with school issues, a community committee that deals with community, and an international community or committee. We also have a social club, indoor cafe. We use programs such as Superflex to help with student wellness, zones of regulation. We're also very lucky to have a variety of people coming in to assist us. Co-op students, St. Lawrence College students, big brothers and big sisters, Brockville Braves come in. So we have a lot of external people that come in and help with our children as well. I know I need to wrap this up soon. The last slide just shows that there's more to our school than reading and math. We try to provide as many opportunities as we can for these children that they wouldn't normally get. This is just a list of some of the things that people we brought in or we've sent students out. But we have, as Superintendent Mills mentioned, we have a very, very busy school. A lot of traffic in and out, and a lot of community in and out. And we're really proud of it. But the most important thing for me, and what makes me the most proud, is that quote at the bottom, and that's something that I tried to summarize into one sentence, but our students value differences as traits of uniqueness. They don't seek anyone else's different. They see them as unique, and that's how they treat them. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm your local trustee, as you well know. In 1977, the school was 3 years old, and that's when I began my teaching career. And the school had a wonderful feel at that time. And being a brand new teacher and going into, and you mentioned it earlier, and some of the trustees may not know what the open concept means, but I was teaching in a classroom. I was doing grade 5-6 at the time. I was in the middle. It was called a pod, and you'd have 90 kids in a pod, one classroom here, one here, and I was in the middle. Best teaching experience I ever had because of the quality of the teachers that were on both sides. And when you're a brand new teacher, you're like a sponge, and you just soak up good teaching because you can't help but soak it up. It's there. And so the open concept was a very interesting approach. It's still there, and you're right, there have been some walls put up. But as Superintendent Mills said, that school has a feel. And when you walk in, it's a welcoming feel. That same feel, Superintendent Mills was there 40 years ago. Did I say 40 years? Holy smokes. It's 40 years ago. It had the same feel because it's a good community. The staff is very dedicated and committed. And as you said, the students look at everyone the same. They accept everyone for who they are. And so I'm very proud of the work they do. That, obviously, I have a slight bias because I started my teaching career there, and I did return at another point. But I'm very proud of the work that's being done. Sad to hear that you're leaving. I've known you for a long time, but best of luck. Thank you. We're going to open it up to comments or questions. Trustee Emmer.
I just have two questions. Maybe this is best to the director. To make a dual track school successful, how many kids need to be in a school?
Mr. Chair, through you, it does depend. What we do want to have is a balance between the French program and the English program. We do have it in a variety of our school settings. I might actually ask Superintendent Barrett to speak about that because we're right in the midst of staffing right now, and I know that she could speak to our current state. We did go through this, as the board may recall, when we had our own program review in 2016, and we did provide some examples of smaller schools where we had to triple grade the English program in order to make the French program balance out over the course of the day. I'll ask if Superintendent Barrett would like to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Through you, Chair. I guess that we would be really looking at, if you're asking specifically with regards to numbers, viability for programming schools, right? And so we initially look around that 250 mark, but we always are working towards growing the program. So wherever we begin to put in consideration for dual track, it really is about the growth of the program through the grades. And I think we've seen success in that approach as a district.
Thank you. You have a second question? Sure.
So in light of that, how do we make sure that our core program is celebrated in our schools and that we're staffing accordingly? Because my worry is that as we progress to dual track, that our core program is getting faded out. And so I can see that we would have 1 to 6 in a classroom. And are we making sure we're staffing that core program properly? That's my worry. And I'd like to hear that we are doing our best to make sure that those core kids are looked after, because it is important.
Yeah, I'm going to let you answer, but we're getting a little off.
We are.
Yeah, you're going into another whole topic.
No, I know, but it is pertinent to this, because it's a smaller school with 200. We want to make sure that we're staffing accordingly, respectfully, Mr. Chair.
So through you, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'll do my best there. And then if I'm missing anything, we can follow up later, perhaps,
okay.
Right? Our French as a second language program are valued regardless of the particular approach in our schools, right? So whether we have a core program or an immersion program, we take great pride in the work of our staff in teaching French as a second language. We know the challenges as a province with regards to staffing and staffing of French programs and qualifications for our teachers. When we are considering the core French program, we are, and I'm hoping I'm getting to your question here, we're looking at, what is appropriate for the full staffing complement within the school, and then what is meeting the needs of the students. So that can look different from school to school, but we're always making those decisions around what's best for students and recognizing the strengths that our teachers bring to our programs. So I'm hoping I got a little bit of that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments, Trustee Cram?
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the calming time that you decided to put in for 17-18, with it being 20 to 30 minutes a day, and I really recognize the need for calming amongst our students. Can you give me examples of how you work that 20 to 30 minutes in during the day? Is it one block, or is it broken up in several areas?
Through you, Chair. It's broken up to one block, and it's more 20 minutes than 30 minutes. That was the range that I suggested for my staff. In most cases, it's done right after recess, right after lunch and right after recess. So the time it would take for a teacher to get them settled would be, from my point of view, would be wasted time anyway. So by the time they get their stuff off and they get their mindset, we're not getting anything into them for 20 minutes anyway. So that's why we introduced the calming time, to make use of that 20 minutes and to have them ready in 20 minutes to be focused and ready to learn. So it's one block of 20 minutes.
Any negative parts to it?
No, I sat in on it. I haven't done the yoga, sorry.
But you're calmer, right?
Through your chair, sorry. But I have sat in on some of the, particularly the Cosmic Kids one that the grade 3 teacher does, and it's it really does relax you and brings you in kind of like a state of mindfulness. What also has caught my attention with some of the other primary teachers is the terminology they're using with the children, and the brain terminology and what calming does with your brain. Some of these things the children are talking about, you would think they would be scientists talking about this information. So they get the terminology as well.
Any other comments or questions? Well, Mike, you've had a wonderful career. Was there one more question here?
No.
You've had a wonderful career.
Thank you.
I want to, on behalf of the board, thank you for the dedication and commitment through all these years. Enjoy your retirement. We will miss you, but thank you very much for everything you've done.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to our next item, I'm going to turn this over to Superintendent Backstrom, who's going to talk about grants for student needs and the budget information. Okay, turn that over to Superintendent Backstrom.
You're wonderful, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. What we're bringing you is our promised update. Unfortunately, the ministry hasn't cooperated. They would normally at this time have given us our Education Financial Information System worksheet, which would help us determine the exact funds and guide us in the any related costs that they require. So that's not there, but what we have done is identify what we can, and you'll see, do I have this one? Am I in control? Okay. You can see in the budget timeline status update, first of all, the announcement for the grants for student needs. In 16-17, it was March 24th. Last year, it was later. They've come back to March 26th. Unfortunately, when they released the ministry budget forms, in 16-17, it was April 8th. Last year, it was April 21. This year, it'll be Friday, April 27th. And they've really slid. They had a 2-week delay last year and a 3-week delay this year, and to allow us to calculate the revenue. We're seeing hints of it on the ministry website. We have a sleuth in the department that looks for things, and we're starting to see it coming up, but it's still not there. This we'll get into later, because that when we get to the last page, last slide, we'll talk about the impact on our schedule. At the bottom there, we put in the labor extension agreements, and the labor extension agreements are giving us around $3.5 million a year, but they're only good for last year and this year and next year. And after that, after 2 years, they'll drop out. So, I mean, if we've got any costs aligned against that, there's a decision to be made. Is there another way to maintain them? Or do we have to look at steps to compensate for the loss of revenue? Okay, and that's why we just mentioned that, because it's a high amount of money, and it's only with us for a limited time, and it's something we have to keep in the back of our minds. The next page, slide 3, is the announcement highlights. The first one is new, and it's special education and the multidisciplinary teams and building system capacity. They're giving us $750,000, which is basically 7.5 teachers. And these teachers, as I understand it, will be itinerant teachers, or they'll float through the system. And that's new this year. I'm sure special education could tell us a lot more about it. Am I not moving? I'm sorry.
I got it. I got it.
I get so caught up in what I'm saying, I lose track of what we're watching. Okay. So that's there. The next one is the funding extended to support adult students. We don't have an amount on that for literacy and math courses. The guidance teachers, the increase in the allocation to support student transition from elementary to secondary, and it's $583,000. And what they've done is recognize grades 7 and 8 as part of the high school or the secondary group, and so they've allocated their funding ratio on those students as well as the 9 to 12, and that's generated the extra $583,000. Student transportation, they mention here just the rider safety training program, and this is really a group that's going around from school board to school board and setting up in parking lots and getting the elementary schools students through it to help train them. The next one, slide 4. Click. Somebody click for me? Okay. Nope. There we go. Bear with me. There we go. Special multi-year grant updates, and we have the special incidents portion, and they've actually increased that by the staffing supports by $11,000, and that's been a long time coming. That hasn't changed for 20 years, something like that. It's when we're using 2 or more students for 1 student. The behavioral expertise amount, we've moved it from an EPO funding to GSN funding, and it's focused around autism. New teacher induction program. We've expanded the coverage, where we are getting all the teachers in the first 5 years, where I think for the minimum amounts it wasn't covered before, and they're also bringing in long-term occasional. So they're expanding NTIP to more teachers, which is good. We don't have amounts for this because we don't have the spreadsheet database. English as a second language, this is year 3 of 3, and then Indigenous Education Grant, and it's year 3 of 3. And again, we don't have amounts, but we know that third year is coming on both of those. The multi-year grant updates on slide 5. The continued reduction of benefit funding benchmarks related to elimination retirement gratuities, year 7 of 12, so that's been going on for 6 years. We're now in year 7, and that's all going back to the early buyout impact of the long-term, of the retirement gratuities. The school foundation grant, year 2 of a 4 phase-in, and they're looking at a campus definition. If you have 2 school properties side by side, they define them as a campus, and new rules kick in. Not necessarily in our favor, but new rules kick in. Full-day kindergarten, year 2 of 2 years, and that's looking at the class size cap, 90% having 29 or fewer, and their funding, because classes will be smaller, more staff to support them. Student grades 4 to 8 class size, this is year 2 of 5 year, and they're bringing it to an average maximum class size of 24.5. And again, we don't have these numbers. We'll have them Friday probably. Student transportation, we normally get 2% cost update adjustment. just 2% additional funding. This year, based on the concerns right across the system about transportation funding, they doubled that, so they gave us an extra 2%. That doesn't come close to funding what the increases we're actually experiencing in transportation, but that's the best they could do according to them. Slide 6 is the capital-related updates. The first one is school operations and maintenance, and they're giving us a 2% increase for non-staff portion of school operations. And it's been a long time since we had any recognition of inflation in this category. And it's finally come up. We don't know exactly how much that is again, but it is in there. School condition improvement, funding to continue. Greenhouse gas reduction fund, funding to continue for another year. Capital planning capacity funding, this is year 5, and this supports 2 people in the planning area. Early years, year 2 of a 5-year commitment for adding childcare spaces, and we don't know how much that's going to be either. And that's the unfortunate thing. We can tell you that there's money coming, we can point to where it is, but we can't quantify it right now. I'll say sorry on behalf of the ministry. Slide 7, compensation-related and labor agreement updates. Collective agreements gave us salary increases, and we're now getting a 1.5% increase in salary benchmarks to offset that, so that'll just wash the increase against the funding. Provincial Benefit Trust for employee health and life and dental benefits. That's just going to flow through us. They'll give it to us, we'll pass it on to the trust. Local priorities funding. These are the extension agreements with the unions, and that's the $3.5 million we talked about before, and that is expected to end in 18-19. Trustee honoraria increase, something close and dear to some people's hearts. They're going from $5,900 to $6,300 on the base amount. We don't know what that, you could probably guess what that's going to total up to, but that's there. The education worker cost adjustment, this is for non-teaching staff, and this is the first update in this component since 2011-12. So we've got some areas where they've really stepped in and said we haven't adjusted some of the factors for many, many years, sometimes decades, and they're turning their attention to them. The EPO grants on slide 8. I'm not going to read all of them. There's the bulk of them are repeats from previous years. You see the little star there for the mental health workers in schools, and that's new. But we're going to need the transfer payment agreement to learn just what restrictions and what reporting is going to be on that one. So we're waiting on that. It is $440,000 of new dollars. So $2.2 million all told for EPO. So certainly a significant amount, but much of these monies we've already set up in previous years, and the expectation is that they would continue. The last slide is the schedule. And we've gone through to, well, we're at April 25th right now. May 1st, we would normally go to SEAC. We don't have the funding information we need, and SEAC, I believe, has agreed to move it to May 15th. And Val is nodding her head, so May 15th. May 9th, we'd be coming in with our budget deliberations in the traditional number format. We're 3 weeks behind, and we could probably try and get by with 1 week behind, but 3 weeks behind is going to put a lot of pressure on and compress a lot of work in a very short period of time. And Carol and Michael, who are behind me, are the people that are going to be doing a lot of that work. But May 9th is going to be difficult, so we're saying that it's likely we will be bringing it to you on May 23rd, and then we would bring you the proposed budget for approval on June 6th. That's up to the trustees, of course, if you want to schedule another meeting, if you want to schedule us into the last meeting in June. It's entirely up to you, and I don't know if that's something you decide at this table or your management council decides. But we are put behind the 8 ball because of the delay on the ministry, and we are asking to push it back a meeting and either eliminate a meeting or do something alternative to give you the time you need to deliberate over this budget. Another casualty of the compressed time is that while we'll attempt to do all the analysis we've done in the past, the timeline's going to be very short to give you the package, the ideal package we'd like to give you, but we'll certainly key in on the significant factors that are important for you when you make your decision on whether to pass or to ask questions about the budget. And that's it, unless there's any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. It's always disappointing when there's a delay, and we know the pressure that puts on you, and then it ultimately puts pressure on the board, because the last thing we want to do is push through a budget until we have a chance to really take a good look at it. So the delay, just to help my understanding, is because the ministry is late in getting these numbers out, so we don't have the numbers to plug into the budget. Am I correct on that?
There's a key worksheet that they would supply us, that we would put in the different variables for our board, and it would generate our funding that we now get, and then in some cases it would generate the allocation of the costing. And without that, we can tell you what we think's there, but we can't give you precise numbers and pull it all together.
Thank you. Trustee Armour.
It's a point of order. Is it possible that we can be presented at the table with a preliminary budget based on last year's numbers? And if there is any major differences in the GSN, that we would make amendments then? It's a question.
It's hard for me to answer that straight up because I've never experienced that.
I don't know if our chair of the audit committee can answer that question. Is that possible?
Well, I'll give you my personal opinion, but I
Yeah,
think it's up to staff to, I'd rather have staff answer that.
I've never experienced it myself, so Director, have you ever experienced that where that's happened?
No, Mr. Chair, I haven't. The reason why is I'm looking at, for instance, the business memo that came out when the GSNs were released, and it speaks to permissible use of some of the funds that were identified in tonight's presentation. And my sense is that we could certainly bring, a draft of if we were to project what we thought was our enrollments, what we thought those enrollments be funded at, where we thought there would be some losses based on some of the information here. My advice would be that's not where we would want to place staff time right now, given that we're trying to both prepare the budget and address staffing. So while I see it would be an exercise that would help the board to get some dialogue going about the what-ifs and possibilities, I don't know about whether it would be both accurate and a wise use of staff time.
Okay, let's start with Trustee McDonald, then Trustee McPherson.
Thank you. So, as I said, I'd give you my personal opinion, but I'd let staff answer. But just and I was going to ask the same question. And the reason I was going to ask the same question is my colleagues in the Toronto District School Board recently passed their budget, and they don't have the technical papers. And so the process that they do is exactly that. They use last year's data, they plug in the information, and what it does is if there's a shortfall, they can highlight that shortfall and say there was a lack of funding from the government, the ministry, for what we provided last year. Pretty solid data, right? Here's what we did, here's what we plan to do, and we didn't get enough money. So they can go back and revisit and adjust the budget. But what they described to me is that over the last few years, they really haven't had to do a lot of adjustments. Minor operational type, administration type adjustments. So it hasn't been off by a huge amount. But the purpose they do that, or the purpose behind why they do that is, as I said, to highlight that issue if there is a shortfall in funding. It kind of draws out the ministry to show that there is an adequate funding formula in place. And I think that's an important piece for us. So, I mean, I've always struggled with the idea that we wait until GSNs come out because we know what our expenses are on a regular basis. If we apply that to the formula that we have currently for how we run, what would be different? And I can guarantee in an election year, I don't think we're going to see a reduced amount of funding coming forward. In fact, we see some increases. So I can appreciate the fact that it may appear to be additional work, but it would certainly give an appearance to the public that we are in control of our finances and have an idea of what we're doing rather than passing a budget at the last minute in June. That's what the appearance is often.
I assume that the Toronto School Board's been doing this for a while.
Yeah, I don't want to say, I would say at least 3+ years,
Okay,
so
all right.
5 or more.
Thank you. Trustee Arp?
And just to pick up on that, because it's difficult in our position when we get it and we have to pass it last minute, and I don't think that's fair to the public. And so to pick up on Trustee McDonald's point, I'd like to see it come earlier. And my question is more to Trustee McDonald: when should we expect it at the board table if we were to follow the Toronto board? When do they get it?
So Toronto starts to share their information shortly after the new year. So January, February timeframe, they start to have discussions. But the real work consists of having a budget passed between March and mid-April.
Which I think is fair. Thank you.
Interesting. Oh, we got Trustee Cram and then Trustee McPherson first and then Trustee Cram.
I just had one question until these guys started talking, and I have 2 questions.
Give us a minute, we may have a couple more.
First question is, I guess, on process. How closely is our budget tied to the passing of the provincial budget? Is the provincial budget passed yet? And so I guess that's the first question. How can they guarantee us funds if their budget is in limbo in the House of Parliament or the provincial legislature? And then I'll get on to my second question.
Who wants to take a stab at that? Lieutenant Backstrom, your budget was passed?
Well, if you have through you, Chair, they've put together their package for the education just as they had for health and social services and all the rest. And the intent is that they will pass the budget before they close the legislature. If they didn't, they'd have to assume, we have to go forward. We can't sit still, and the government has to go forward. It can't sit still. So the best is that they pass. If they didn't pass, they would have to assume that the government that stepped forward after the election would do it as a housekeeping item at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Second question?
Second question. These 2 gentlemen brought up an interesting concept. In the business world, we establish our budget based upon the previous year's expenditures. Like, if I'm a cash crop farmer, I know what my input cost for last year was. I also know what the return was. That will in turn determine where I need to put extra money in my budget for next year. So technically, we could start this process in January, because about that time we start getting the actuals that are coming out. We know in the first part of the year where the money's gone and how it has been spent, so we can identify our shortfalls. So perhaps we need to follow along on this concept. I'm not saying do it for this year, but it is an interesting way of doing it, because when we start dealing with the actuals and when we get into the second or third report on the actuals, the picture starts to pop forward as to where the shortfalls or the surpluses are. So that when we hit this time, we have a very accurate picture of our needs. And then we can base that upon what revenues we can expect. And also, if there's any lobbying to be done, we know where to adjust the shortfalls, be it spec ed or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting concept. That's just a comment, not a question.
Thank you. Trustee Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Two different questions. If memory serves me right, the last 2 years when we were doing budget, when the proposed budget came in for approval, we actually made changes for surplus that we wanted built into the budget. And it had to go back to a second meeting to come in for approval. And I see in this one there is only one, and that really concerns me that there's no chance to look at if we have to alter something. So that's just a comment on that. I guess my English is a little bit out too on slide 5. If somebody could explain to me what an average maximum is? I'm going to reduce the average maximum class size. So I mean, I know what an average is and I know what a maximum is, but I'm not certain what an average maximum is.
Who's going to take that? Superintendent maximum or average maximum?
Well,
Average of all the maximums.
Pardon me?
The average of all the maximums.
More than 24.
I'll let Superintendent Baxter go with this one.
I'm assuming they're taking the maximum class size and just taking it for across and then just averaging it. But I don't do that specific calculation myself.
We're assuming it's, you're looking at all the maximums and taking an average, is that? How about we dig into that and get that answer for you? Mr. McAllister.
With regard to the concept of a draft budget, to what extent is there common work between a draft budget and the actual budget based on the figures that we have yet to receive? Is there any common ground with regard to time and effort?
Well, Mr. Chair, I want to begin by saying I'll defer to the people that are given that work. And just as a footnote before the conversation begins is, let's recall where the Finance Department has spent their time the last 3 years. Last year, time was spent in terms of dealing with the accommodation review and using staff time to help develop tables and the final staff report. And these are the same people that we're using to support the budget process. In the year before that, if I recall correctly, staff were working on two things. One was drafting the budget and then responding to questions about how to close off our deficit and tracking the deficit that came, I believe, out of a board motion in June of 2015. I guess to be quite frank with the board, anything is possible, and staff will be prepared to follow your direction, including if there's a different way of modeling and commencing this work and this dialogue earlier. There is an opportunity cost, and it depends on what's happening in the given year that where staff time might be invested or devoted. I should also mention that 2 years ago, we were also dealing with the aftermath of the extension agreements that came in through the negotiated settlements and how to apply that within the time frame that was required by law for working with our different federations. So if it was the sole business of the Finance Department to draft the budget, I think we could actually engage in this perhaps much earlier. And I will make some inquiries into other boards about who are doing this so I can get some better understanding about how they invest in that. I do think that they have infrastructure, if we're talking about Toronto District School Board, that may be able to offset some of that work in other departments with other people, and maybe not dealing with the same local circumstances that we were dealing with, for instance, our accommodation review last year. But with that in mind, I would turn it over to my colleague, Superintendent Backstrom, to talk about and provide a response to that question.
Could I have that question again, because my mind was still going the average maximum as they were talking. Excuse me.
My question was with regard to the draft budget versus the actual budget that you would be working on if you had the numbers, and you don't. Is there any common work and time that would be spent on a draft budget?
We are continuing to move forward with the budget because we're getting information on the cost side from the school board, from the different superintendents and managers, and we're pulling that together, and principals as well, and we're moving forward with that. At the same time, we're looking at the letters and correspondence we have to see where the increases are happening and trying to determine what the limitations, because the other thing that the ministry package gives us is any enveloping requirements and maximums and all these other little catches that work together. So we're moving forward with that as well. What it does do, I mean, if we were to go forward and do it, then there'd be a risk as to the numbers because we wouldn't be working with the hardest data. And at the same time, whenever you do an estimate, the first request you're going to have is, well, now that we have the actuals, why is your estimate out? And we go ahead and we basically reiterate the whole process again to explain, okay, now that we've waited a few weeks and we've now got this, we'll put it in. Toronto District School Board, I believe their budget's over $1 billion. They have their materiality limit, okay, $1 million, $100,000, $10 million. They have, when they say things are okay, they're talking in terms of $1 billion budget. And yeah, it's probably hard to go too far wrong in $1 billion budget. We're at $360 million. We're large, but obviously we could be, our order of materiality is smaller and we'd be working through it. I will say that in the last while, we've been working with some special requests on the transportation side that have pulled our staff from some of the budget work to deal with requirements from outsiders that we have to provide. So as we've had things last year or the year before, we're still running into other requests, and I'm not saying that as excuses. Our staff are good and we're coping with it and we're moving forward. But we, as the director said, we're not operating in isolation on one thing. Again, Toronto District School Board probably has an entire department devoted to doing budgets.
Mm-hmm. Just, Chair, may I make a comment? I understand that this is it's a complicated process, and there are. I think it's more complicated than it appears. It's not just a question of plugging in new numbers based on the past numbers, because actually I don't believe in that kind of budgeting process, to tell you the truth, because it doesn't take into account variables. To use Trustee McPherson's analogy of farming and business, you know, I may decide to go from corn to soybean, and that may incur more acreage or more machinery, etc. So those are some of the variables, and variables in our case might be programming and whatnot. So I'm not sure I know the answer, but there it is. Okay, thank you. Trustee Cartman.
Through you, Chair. Maybe this is for Superintendent Dawes to answer. I think the funding formula is based on numbers as far as student numbers in our board. Are you truly confident in your forecasts for the numbers that are going to be there this year to allow us to do something that's being suggested by the other two trustees here?
Through you, Chair. Great question. I would say yes. I mean, we have a pretty good history in our board, I think, of demonstrating that, particularly on the system enrollment projection numbers that we provide, that we're quite close on an annual basis. We have good processes in place to be able to respond to those enrollment differences on the staffing front once that comes into place each September. But I wouldn't want my answer to bump up against what our superintendent of business is suggesting as it relates to budgetary timelines and processes. Our process is quite a bit different. But yeah, I am quite confident every year of our ability to project our enrollments on an accurate basis.
Supplemental, thank you for that. Another question on the same idea. This past year, we've pumped in quite a few EAs into our system. That wasn't counted on last year in the budget time. Same with the special needs kids. Are we pretty confident on the numbers on those two? Especially with kindergarten children coming in that may need these services?
Director.
Mr. Chair, through you, I'll begin and I'll ask Superintendent Allen to comment. No, we're not. I'll say that for two reasons. We have drawn down the last 2 years through the board's decision to have a surplus budget on EA support. Through our work with community agencies, we can anticipate a certain number of students that are coming through the early years programs and whatnot who may have special needs and are working with community agencies. In the last 2 years, we have received children with high needs that we weren't anticipating receiving. That's a good news story for our school district because we are prepared to receive everyone's child. It does take more time, and it does require resources at times that we hadn't initially anticipated. And so the board providing a cushion to staff has been helpful in the past. I'm going to ask Superintendent Allen, though, to comment on that because I think there's a difference between accuracy and anticipation. We seek to be accurate when we do our work on behalf of the board and provide you with the information. We may not anticipate some of the developments in spite of our best efforts to keep grounded in some local realities about who's joining us and moving into our communities and coming to our schools. I'll ask Superintendent Allen to comment for a minute.
Through you, Chair. We always build in a contingency within our special ed plan for unexpected students who come into the system with special needs. And for the last 2 years, we have far surpassed that by students coming from other systems, other boards, other areas of the province, in fact. So with the increased student population, especially this year, we again tend to get a number of high need students that they need support in their classrooms, and we have to find a way to put that in. Otherwise, their achievement and their success in the classrooms wouldn't be what it is today. So we end up with that reality.
Thank you. Trustee Armour.
I'm good for now.
You're good for now? Trustee McDonald?
Thank you. So I can appreciate the comments and the concerns, but I want to go to the variable situation. So the document that we're waiting for from the ministry is a document that we plug in our number of students. So the only variable associated to that is how many students we have. We feel confident in our projection based on what we've had in the past, but we also have had instances through after we pass a budget thinking everything's great, and then all of a sudden in October, November, December, it's not. All of a sudden we have fewer kids, we've got increased expenses. So variables happen all the time. So this idea that we wait for the ministry document and all of a sudden pass the budget, everything's going to be green, perfect for the next 12 months, it's a bit of a fallacy. My question now for staff is, if we're waiting for a document for revenue to determine what our actual revenue is, what work have we done thus far to determine what our expenses are?
We'll start with the director.
Mr. Chair, through you, I'll begin. I'll ask Superintendent Backstrom then to join the discussion. So, trustees, what we ordinarily do is to go through the process of asking each budget holder what is their projected needs for the following year, and what the anticipated costs are. The finance department then puts that together, and then we determine what it looks like that we're projecting as costs, and whether based on the enrollments and what we would guess would be our revenue, whether we think we're going to fall within that that reasonable range, or whether we may be at risk. We try to work with some of the variables. Some of the variables that we've had throughout the previous years are questions about as we heard a moment ago, the number of special needs students who may be coming in. Other variables that we've had would be in terms of any kind of commitments that are imposed upon the board as a result of some type of labor settlement and has been stretched over in terms of having to be paid over multiple years. We do try to ensure that we have been modest and conservative to bring the information to you. Not unlike what I heard Superintendent Backstrom mention, which is estimates that are far off base don't tend to generate great confidence in decision-making or in the staff's efforts to give you good information. So we do try to make sure that we are close to where we think the board would be comfortable in terms of having a dialogue and making commitments. And the process does begin anywhere between December and late February for starting to collect information from budget holders. This year we were a little bit later off the mark because we did have a change in the CFOs, and as you heard from Superintendent Backstrom a moment ago, much of our time has been devoted to what he's described as transportation requests, which has consumed a great deal of staff time and his time since his coming on board in mid-January. So I'll just ask Superintendent Backstrom if there's anything that I missed in terms of the process. I know that that was maybe too high level, but if you wanted to get into a bit more detail, please do.
Through you, Chair. Certainly we start from the revised estimate that we just completed for the trustees, and then we look at it to see if we're aware of anything since the time we did that has changed. We're also looking for additional revenue sources, and is that money restricted to new spending, or is the ministry recognizing expenditures we made in the past and now providing funding for it, as they're doing in transportation? And we would go through each of the categories, whether it was labor, we'd be looking at benefits, we'd be talking to HR, what are the benefit rates for next year? We'd be, utilities, are there any changes there? We'd also be looking on the capital side. We're not strictly we've got a capital budget as well as an operating budget, and we'd be working through what we're planning on building in the next while and looking at funds that we have set aside for building. So we're doing all that. The other side of this is that we're not just doing a budget for the trustees. We're doing a budget for the ministry. And the ministry's budget requires us to work in EFIS and fill in the information, and they want it at a level of detail. We can't put in overall enrollment. They want it by school, in some cases by classroom or by primary or intermediate. So they're asking for it not only for the financial budget, but they're looking at it for their record keeping and data collection requirements across the entire system. So we've got dual taskmasters here, not that you're taskmasters is a bad word perhaps, but we've got two people, at least two we're serving. And the requirements from the ministry are a much more detailed level and a much more regulated level. It's interesting that you brought up the Toronto District School Board, because I was aware that they went ahead and did it because they didn't wait, and they may not be the only board. It tends to be the larger ones, and we discussed it briefly, in finance, but we turned away from it because it's too late in the game to change in the middle of a process. Certainly, it's something that's possible. If a big board like Toronto can do it, I'm sure a board our size can do it. It does mean we'd have to still do the ministry requirements, even if we did something, and then we'd have to reconcile between what we gave the school board trustees and what we gave the ministry. It starts to add in complexity and detail, and next year we'll probably get the EFIS and everything on time and early. So, you know, we're responding to, I don't think it's ever been this late in I don't know how many years, and we're responding to that. But we would do a budget like you would do it for any other business. We'd start at the basics, we go right down to the staffing and ask for organization charts, and then put salaries to those people and add them all up, put benefits to those people. Then we look at all the expenses, whether they're office expenses, whatever, and we just keep rolling it up and rolling it up. And we've got a small group of people that have the capability of doing that. And I think you've covered a lot of it, Director, on how it is, and I just wanted to bring in the fact that the ministry's also there with their hands out for information.
Yeah, I think trustees, the conversation is great, and I think Trustee McPherson probably said it best. Probably this is something to look at as we move forward. We are already in the middle of something right now. There's additional pressures being put on our superintendents, which we'll talk about at another point. It's adding a huge workload. So we're into the game. When I look at the timeline, the last thing I want is for the board to have to make a tough decision. I agree with that. And if we as the board have to agree to have other meetings in between, I have no problems calling those meetings. The last thing I want is the end of June, us trying to cram a budget through that. That to me is not good governance. So if we feel, and like I said, the process has started, we're dealing with extra pressures. That aside, we have to pass a budget. I'm prepared to come to the trustees and look at other dates as we get closer, or as we get into May and into June. We have off Wednesdays that are available to us, and I have no hesitation to recommend additional meetings to cover this. And the meetings would focus specifically on the budget conversation. My feeling is right now, and is that we're moving into May right now. It's a little late to change the game, but I do think the change is probably worth a discussion, because I think if other boards are trying it, and I think it's a matter of our staff checking into that, finding what the details are and how that thing works, because I think, Trustee McDonald, it sounds, and Trustee Arner, it sounds like a good way to go, and avoid these pitfalls that we have when the government doesn't come through with the announcements as we anticipated. Or it's a different way of looking at it. But I just feel that right at this point in time, it's a little late in the process, but I don't want the trustees to feel at all that we're going to be pressured to not make a decision, or to pressure to make a decision because of time, because we will work the time in. We will make it happen. Having said that.
Trustee McPherson wants to speak, and he was in order.
Trustee McPherson.
You just answered my question. Thank you.
Pardon me?
You just answered my
Okay.
question.
Thank you.
David.
Trustee McDonald.
So I had a follow-up for the director. So whenever you describe to me what has taken place so far, you described to me that you've gone to budget owners and you've collected the information and you've compared that basically to what we had last year. It sounded like you have already done that work. You've already compared what we had anticipated from a revenue standpoint. So if that's the case, why do we have so many blanks here tonight, and why can't we be talking about what that comparison is so far, if you've already done that work, and it appears that you have?
Mr. Chair, through you, that's still at a staff level, and I wouldn't believe it'd be worthwhile to bring it before the board, because I don't think that it would be information that we could stand behind confidently, and it's still at a discussion level among staff.
So may I clarify then? So your comment about creating extra work, it really isn't creating extra work because you've already done it. Is that correct?
I don't know if I understand, Mr. Chair.
Well, earlier you had made a comment that if we went to this process, it would be a double effect and extra work. So having to do it pre-GSN release, technical paper release, and having to do it post, if you've already done it and you have it at a staff level, that work is done. It's not additional work that's going to be required. You may have to fine tune it for us to be able to see it, but what you're telling me tonight is you have that work at the staff level.
Mr. Chair, through you, we don't have any complete work. We're commencing the work through our usual process, and it's part of our conversation. I wish I could say it's sides of the same coin, but it's not.
Okay, rich discussion. Trustee, you have a question?
It was more of a comment about this. Just through you, Chair. I don't think we need to change the dates for this, and if we add them, I'm in agreement with that. But what I would like to see is discussion and actually implementing this in the next budget year. So I don't know if we can table that or if you need a motion on the table to debate it, but that's something I would like to see. Because I think, to David's point, if the work's already done, it's not like we're asking for it again. So.
Can I make a suggestion to Trustee Armour that perhaps we bring it to Management Council and have a discussion and come to some kind of a motion that we can bring to the board at the next meeting?
At the next meeting? Yes.
Thank you. Trustee McPherson, then Trustee Cram.
I would value a change in the budgeting process, and we've changed it. I've lost track of how many times we've changed it over the years. But how the budget is presented should not be an administrative decision. I question the trustees. I still think it's a good idea, don't get me wrong, because we do have the numbers at some point, the actuals. But I'm not sure that it's an avenue that the trustees should be going down, because it is an administrative decision. We are not in charge of preparing the budget. We are in charge of approving the budget.
We're in charge of when we get it.
So that's just a comment.
Valid comment. Trustee Cram?
I'm caught a little bit in between right here, Chair, because I agree a little bit with what Mr. Trustee McPherson is saying. I would like to see staff bring to us in September, because we need to go through the budget process here, because that's what's been started, and ask them to do a study somewhere of other ways budgets are deliberated, and come back in September to say, here's some ones we would like to do, here's some suggestions. We need to keep our own, but then it's done without the time frame that we have to do right now. Give them some time to look at other possibilities and bring it back in September so they can start the school year for next year with a different process, if that's what they recommend.
Okay. I think we're going to take this to Management Council tomorrow and have a chat about this and see where we go with that. You've got a good point, Trustee McPherson, in terms of responsibility in terms of the operational side, but that's a discussion we need to certainly have. Thank you very much for that. Moving on to the next is the update of the trustee work plan priority graduation rate. I'm going to turn this over to Superintendent Coombs and Superintendent Dawes.
Thank you, Chair. Nice to be here and have this opportunity with Superintendent Coombs to bring the board up to speed with the Director's Work Plan Goal 1. Trustees may recall we had a similar opportunity back in September to inform the board of graduation rate, and it's nice to be back to bring you up to speed with where we're at with this particular goal item, and have information to share with you that's more up to date with respect to the 16-17 school year. And of course, Our board has a good, long, rich history with graduation rate, really before the ministry started preparing for board's official graduation rates. And the connection with the mission cannot be understated. We prepare all students for a successful life. We want all of our students to succeed, and certainly graduation rate is a good way to monitor our progress and inform the improvement efforts of our schools and the board as a whole. So I really have a plan for this presentation with Superintendent Coombs, dividing it really into two parts. I want to begin, if I could, providing the board again with an overview of the methodology that the ministry uses to calculate graduation rates, because I do believe it's important to understand how these numbers are generated. Following that, again, bring trustees up to speed with up-to-date historical information up now to 2016-17 school year, specific to our board-wide graduation rates, and we also have information to share with you from a school-by-school perspective, and I'll give you more information on how those methodologies are applied as well. And following that presentation from me, I'll hand the mic over to Superintendent Coombs to give you an overview as to where we're at with the action plan as it relates to Goal 1, and some examples of the important outreach that's taking place with students across our district. So jumping in, if I could, just a reminder on the methodology that's used by the ministry to calculate graduation rate. Now, on the very basic level, it seems like an easy idea, an easy concept. You take a group of students in grade 9, and then you measure how many of those students after 5 years have either graduated or not graduated. So the number of students from that original cohort, as a percentage of that cohort, is your graduation rate. But as identified on this extract from the ministry documentation, we do have to be careful about how we analyze the data and understand some of these terms. And the really tricky one we want to always keep our minds on is how we identify the grade 9 cohort. There are some very specific criteria that the ministry uses to identify the grade 9 cohort. So for example, the student must be between 13 and 15 years of age as of December 31st for that year. So you see in that top row, it's actually referenced the year 2012 as our most recent example. So we're looking for students in that grade 9 cohort that were between 13 and 15 years of age as of December 31st, 2012, right, which would have represented the final fifth year of 2016-17 as the fifth year from which that cohort of student is identified with an outcome, okay? What grade is it? It's grade 9 students only. Registration, the cohort identifies students in their first year of registration in a secondary school in Ontario, okay? Time period, the student can be enrolled at any time during the academic year, in this case of 2012-13, for the 2016-17 board-wide graduation rates that I'm going to share with you, and did not become deceased or leave Ontario before the end of grade 12. So it does not include students that were in that cohort originally and then moved out of province. Only students that are resident within the province of Ontario, okay? The ministry now has been providing boards with graduation rates for 4 years, I believe. And the timelines were not consistent in the beginning, and now they've become a little more formulated. So I thought trustees would be interested in this reminder about how the graduation rate timelines actually work. We receive, as a board, preliminary data through ONSIS in October and November. And all boards across Ontario are provided an opportunity to verify that information and then work with the ministry to verify it as correct before the ministry actually provides that as a final figure, not until April or May of that year, okay? So we have only recently received our final, if you will, graduation rate on a board-wide basis specific to the 2016-17 school year. A reminder again, the ministry only releases board-wide graduation rates. I'm going to be sharing with you later on in the presentation school-by-school graduation rates. Those are not provided by the ministry. That's something that we do internally just to inform our own school improvement and system improvement efforts. Okay. And I'll clarify again what the difference is between our calculated school-by-school rates versus the ministry's methodology for the board-wide rate. So this is a historical view of our board-wide graduation rates, 2013-14 to 2016-17, okay? So the blue bar is indicating the UCDSB graduation rate system-wide, and again, that's 2013-14 on the far left. On the far right is the most recent 2016-17 fifth year graduation rate. The red bar is the provincial comparison rate. So a couple of things to note here. You might be wondering, well, why isn't there a red bar on the far right? Well, that's because although the ministry has been able to confirm through boards their board-wide graduation rates, it has not yet released the provincial-wide graduation rates. So that will come out probably in June, I'm anticipating, but we don't have that information to share yet. You can see overall our board, it's a good news story. We've increased 3.7 percentage points over the past 4 years. 2013-14, our graduation rate was 80.7. 2016-17, 84.4%. Maybe one last point. Maybe to the far right, we don't see that we're inching closer and closer, of course, to 2019-20, right, which is our landmark year for the 90% graduation rate. It's incredible how time flies. We have 3 more years before we reach that 2019-20 year. So with that, what I wanted to do next is walk you through, and you may recall this format from our September presentation, how we can break down for more information for you where those grade 9 cohort destinations happen. So again, the cohort is identified. There's really only several possible outcomes as measured through this methodology. Either the student graduates, or the student doesn't graduate, or the student from that cohort is still in school beyond the 5-year period. So what you're looking at here is just a breakdown of that cohort number and the outcome from a graduation perspective. So you can see on that bottom row, there's the 2016-17 school year. The number of students in the grade 9 cohort for that cohort year, which was 2012-13, 5 years prior to 2016-17, was 2,052 students. 1,731 of those students from that cohort graduated after their 5th year, so that's 84.4%. So that's how we get the 84.4 graduation rate. Now again, the grade 9 cohort, that 2052, that excludes students who have left the province of Ontario. So that cohort might have been larger at the beginning. If the student leaves to go to another province, they're pulled out of that cohort by the Ministry of Education. So if a student didn't graduate, what happened? Well, there's a couple of opportunities. They might have left without an OSSD, or they might have an OSD or certificate still in progress. Okay? So again, with the 2012-13 cohort, or 2016-17 5th year, there's that 2,052 again. There's 176 students that left school without an OSSD. Okay? So that's 8.6% of that cohort that left school without an OSSD. Included in that OSSD are 13 students that actually completed a certificate. And I have to say again, this is not a judgment statement on the value of the certificate. It's just from the purposes of the ministry's methodology, it's calculating graduation based on an OSSD. Okay? So that's why that number is included in the 176. There were 172 students of that 2052 cohort that we're still continuing on with either an OSSD or certificate. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, we have now got for you updated school-by-school graduation rates. I think what I want to do, and I'm sorry the print is so small, but just draw your attention to those notes at the bottom. Starting with the very bottom one, is a reminder again, you'll see that little asterisk beside total board. So the total board graduation rate includes, from the grade 9 cohort, students that transferred to other boards during that 5-year time period. So again, from the cohort, if they go to another province, they're pulled out. If the student transfers to another board from that cohort within the province of Ontario, they're included in that number, okay? When we do our school by school graduation rate calculations, we aren't able to understand when students move to another school board within Ontario. So when we calculate that, we take those students out of that grade 9 cohort. Let me say that one more time. So if a student starts in an Upper Canada District School Board school, transfers to another school board within Ontario from that cohort, we take those students out of that cohort. From the ministry's board-wide figure, if a student transfers to another board, it's still in that grade 9 cohort figure, okay? Now, one last point. It's always based on the grade 9 cohort. So if a student starts at a particular school and is in that cohort, if they transfer to another school within the Upper Canada District School Board, it still relates back to the original cohort that student started with at school, okay? So if a student starts at any given school, transfers to another school, it's still related to the graduation rate for the school that they started at. Okay, that's what those numbers are reflecting here. So again, we have to remember when we look at this information, it's not value statements, it's just clarification on how that methodology is used so that we can understand what it might draw us in the way of conclusions, okay, and information to move forward. So I think it's important to note when we look at the school-by-school results, now although we have seen an increase in graduation rate board-wide over the past 4 years, the school-by-school information tells a bit of a different story. We've seen about half of our schools see an increase in graduation rate over the 3-year period. About the other half have stayed the same or have not increased. And so that's what has really driven the work that we've been doing this year, being led by Superintendent Coombs, to get to the heart of very, very specific action that can get us very precise to reaching our overall graduation rate goals. And so now I'm going to turn the clicker over to Superintendent Coombs so he can give you more information about what we're doing with this current year of students to move us down the path towards the trustee goal.
Thank you very much, Phil, and good evening, trustees, and through you, Mr. Chair. One of the things I think Superintendent Dawes highlighted was that although we are improving, we are not tracking towards 90% in 2020. So to that end, this goal, as part of the Director's work plan, is being executed this year. We need to go 2% every year for the next 3 years to hit 90% by 2020. So, by the way, also with us tonight in the gallery, I'd like to point out is Principal of Student Success, Jeff Trasick. Jeff, thanks for being here tonight. And Jeff, of course, has been a big part in his role of this plan and the engaging of the staff in this plan as well. The thing which I really like about this goal is it's the definition, it's the classic definition of a SMART goal. It's very specific, it's very measurable, and it's very time constrained. We only have a certain amount of time to achieve this goal, and we have a certain number of kids that we have to achieve it with. The first thing we had to do back in September was define who are these kids? Who makes up this 90%, this cohort, this 5th-year cohort? And once we know who they are, we need to know where they are, and we need to know what their status is. So we did that by October and November. We provided all our day schools with the information of their 5th-year cohort. So although that student might not be at your school now, they are included in your graduation rate. Here's where they are now. So that was really an interesting opportunity for principals to look at those numbers and say, or look at those students and say, these students, they're my 5th-year cohort, they're now at TR Leger, I think I better go over and engage and make sure that they're doing okay. Or, they're with me right now, maybe we as an SST team need to look at these kids more and give them more support to ensure that they have every opportunity to get off to complete their graduation requirements by June 30th. It's been a fascinating journey and it's not over yet. So what I'm going to attempt to do, the information that we've given you is lag data. It's a year old. What I'm going to attempt to do is give you a bit of a prediction with some assumptions built into that. So while I hold on to my predictions with a loose grip, I'm going to give you my best shot based upon the work that we've been doing. So who are this cohort that we're talking about? Well, in the fall of 2013, we had 2,015 of them. So that's our cohort. Those are the kids that we're working with. So those are the first group of kids that we identified. Of that 2,015, if we're to hit 86.4% this year, we need 1,741 to graduate. So in my office on my whiteboard, 1741 is in a big red number and circled. That's our goal. After 4 years, 1,492 graduated with us. So at the end of last year, now some of them came back. They're doing a 5th year or a victory lap, and that's great. We welcome them back. But for the purposes of our cohort, we're not paying attention to them this year. We've had 47 in-year graduates. That means at the end of semester 1 and a couple afterwards, 47 additional students from this cohort graduated. That leaves us with a grand total of 1,539. So if nothing else changed and if we didn't have any other information, we'd only have a 76.4% graduation rate. At this point, it doesn't look too good, but we have to drill a little bit deeper into the numbers. So as you remember, we had 2,015 students. We now know that 20 students left the province. So by tracking their OEN, or their Ontario Education Number, we're able to determine the students that did leave, so went to Alberta or Manitoba or Quebec or left the country, and we were able to take them out of our count number. So that means we're now dealing with 1,995 currently in our cohort. Those are our kids. 176 of those students have transferred to another board. So I think 52 or 53 of those have gone to our coterminous board. The remainder have either gone to Ottawa, Renfrew, Limestone, or one of the more one of the other publicly funded boards in Ontario. But they are out of our. They account towards our graduation rate, but they're out of our control. I'm going to come back to them in a little bit. 141 are still active with the Upper Canada School Board. That means they're with us. They're in their 5th year cohort. They're in one of our day schools, and we're working with them actively. Actually, and what you'll notice, I'm going to update some of these numbers. These numbers are 7 days old, and one thing with this project is we're constantly updating. So for example, that number should now be 152 because we have re-engaged that many students from 7 days ago, 3 just in the last couple of days. So as I go through, I may make some adjustments. That's just because we're finding out more as each day goes by. 136 of that original 1995 have transferred out, withdrawn without a diploma, or have been categorized as no-shows. Now, a no-show would be somebody who registered at another school for the fall and just never showed up. And so we lost track of them. So those are our dropouts. Those are also who obviously we're paying a lot of attention to during this project. By the way, 3 are still being homeschooled. We found 2 of them. They have not indicated any, they don't want to be re-engaged in school. We're trying to find the other one. So let's put it all together. I can try to give you our best guess of where we're going right now. So 1995, and again, remember that's 20 students who have left the province. We need 1724 to graduate. We've had 1539 cross the line so far. That means we need an additional 185 students from those targeted students in our 5th year cohort to graduate to reach our goal. So, of those that transferred to the other boards, remember those 176, over the past 3 years, they've graduated at a rate of about 65%. Sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. Let's assume a 65% grad rate. That would mean 114. Now that's a big assumption. Maybe 80% got through this year. Maybe 50% get through. That's obviously going to impact us, but I'm just going to go with the basic assumption right now and we'll adjust as we go. We calculate that on those 5th year students in our day schools, we have 43 that are on track to graduate. All things being equal, and in case something goes wrong, hopefully nothing does, they should graduate. That means we need 28 students from our priority list who need real intervention and significant re-engagement to get across the line. So what we have done is we have a grad coach team, and our team looks at this data on a regular basis. We meet every 2 weeks, and these are student success learning partners, and these learning partners each of them coordinate with day schools, work with staff and SST teams, and engage students both from the withdrawal list as well as the at-risk list that we have, and get them back on track to make sure that we can get them over. Now, keep in mind, when we're talking of a cohort of about 2,000 kids, 20 kids is 1%. If we can get 20 kids we didn't get before across the line, that's 1% more. 40 kids is 2%. That, of course, is presupposing that all the kids we got before we still get. We still have to get everyone else we've gotten, but we need to get extra kids. So that's the plan. So last week we met on Thursday. I asked them, give me your best estimate. Are we going to get 28? And they didn't want to give me a really hard number, but they felt that we were on track to both re-engage, and as you know, we're getting more kids coming back who are off our list completely. I'm going to talk about a couple of them in a second. So do we have a shot? Yeah, I think we've got a really good shot. More importantly, what we're learning from this project we'll be able to apply next year and start pushing downstream to make sure we continue to catch kids earlier than later. So a couple of the interventions I've talked about, these are not the only interventions, but I'm highlighting them for the purposes of today. We have hired an admin support assistant. What this person does is monitor the list centrally. She updates us, well, every 2 weeks we get an official update, but she actually updates us daily when she makes a new contact. She calls kids, she refers them on to both our student success learning partners or the day school administrators, and we get them back on the rolls. We've also hired 2 student success learning partners. We call them graduation coaches. Their job is to bridge the gap between the student and the school. I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in a second. But they help support staff in schools personalize a program. They also reach out personally to kids in very personalized ways to interest them in getting back in school and give them a personalized plan to get over the line. This is one such student. Now, this would be the example of a student we would look at in some of our engagement meetings. Now, obviously, we've taken out a lot of personal details that we would talk about in the meeting, but we want to do that for confidentiality reasons. So this is an 18-year-old student. This student left in November of 2017 with 26 credits. They had completed all their compulsory credits. They had completed their literacy test. They were successful in their literacy test. This particular student had 8 credits at the end of grade 9 and 16 credits at the end of grade 10 and 24 credits at the end of grade 11. They were completely on track to graduate. They slipped off later on in life. This particular student left on really bad terms, and while I won't go into the details, there was a lot of emotional, and it was emotional disengagement. It wasn't just just going off to get a job. This was someone who left angry. He was on our withdrawal list, so one of our learning partners contacted him. Found out his cell number, and by the way, one thing we've discovered that if you've got the cell number, you got the kid. They may not respond to a voicemail, but they'll respond to a text within minutes. This particular student, a learning partner was able to meet with them, was able to say, you know what if I could say that there was a route to graduation by June 30th, would you be interested? And the person said, yep, I'd be very interested. And they were able to start looking at co-op materials. This person actually worked close to full-time hours. And it was able to look at an independent course of study, which would enable them to keep some working hours and go back to school. And more importantly, this was a learning partner coordinating with the TR Leger staff to both re-engage them, get them back in, and get them a plan of attack to get them across the line. Our learning partner is texting this person on a weekly basis. Sometimes they're texting on a daily basis. This is a student who would not have graduated from this cohort, and we think will, at least has a shot. This particular student, again, this student is actually with us, was at TR Leger currently, but was about to be taken off the rolls, was identified by the TR Leger staff as at risk, and they wanted additional intervention. This person had completed their literacy qualifications. By the way, most of these fifth-year kids have completed their literacy qualifications. They've either completed the course or they've been successful. This person also had all their volunteer hours, had 26 credits, but still needed an English, a math, and then 2 other electives. It was really fascinating. When they connected, this person agreed to meet the student success learning partner at Timmy's. They sat down and said, you know what, the reason why I'm disengaged is not because I dislike my teachers or I dislike the or I feel I can't do it, it's survival. I'm homeless. I'm couch surfing. I'm kind of living day to day. My priorities are not academic, they're survival. So again, if we put a plan in place for you and we worked around some of the obstacles you have now, and I can show you a very clear path to graduation in June, would that be something you'd be interested in? And again, working with staff and working with both the SST staff, the administration at TR Leger, this student is back on track. I'd love to tell you that both students in A and B are guaranteed to graduate. I can't tell you that. Anything could happen in the next 8 weeks. And that's one of the things we've realized, and one of our insights, is that when students might be completely on track to graduate, and at the very last bit, they just fall off they fall off the truck. They encounter a bump. We could have mentioned dozens of students in this. There was another student that we contacted, and she said, I'd love to come back to school, but I'm delivering a baby in 2 weeks. Obviously, I can't graduate. Well, that particular student had 28 and a half credits and had completed I think 10 booklets from one particular course from TR Leger. All she needed was someone to say, I'll help you with the correspondence. I'll deliver them to your door. Do you want to graduate? And she said, absolutely, I want to graduate. So again, we have many of these students that we've encountered that are part of this this cohort that's right at the end of their opportunity to get across the line. Now, maybe they would have come back next year or the next year after that or the next year after that, but if they can see a way to graduation now, it benefits everybody. Some of the insights, and by the way, part of this is a pilot project, and we're creating a report which we'll be writing up at the end of June. So every time we meet, we list some of the insights that we're noticing about this project and some of the things we need to apply going forward. The majority of these students that we do encounter are at TR Leger. Only 5% are formally identified. Only 12% have IEPs. So that was a bit of a surprise for me. 30% are working full-time, but many are working up to full-time hours. Many of them part-time jobs, all of them minimum wage. They're not sitting at home with an Xbox, right? They're engaged in the workforce. One of the things that the learning partners come back increasingly, and we've brought this to this table before, that handoff between day school and TR Leger is critical. It creates a vulnerability. And I think both administrations and personnel at both the day school and TR Leger are working very hard and care very deeply, but I think there is a certain amount. Once that student leaves your immediate responsibility and they haven't yet engaged in the next responsibility, there's a bit of a gap there. Our grip on them becomes looser. If you've ever tried to leave Bell or Rogers, you know how close their grip they keep on you? It's very difficult because they know as soon as you're off the line, they've lost you. They understand human psychology. And I think that's one of the things we're realizing this as well. I had mentioned again, experiential learning and co-op hours are critical. One of the things we did was this year was add more co-op hours to TR Leger so we could bring kids in more on an ongoing basis. And again, I mentioned this before, many were on track to graduate. And they got disrupted later in the later grades. I also mentioned before, engaging them through text messaging is much, don't leave voice messages, leave them a text and they will get back to you, and oftentimes it's within minutes. I just want to highlight this because this was really something that we were surprised at. By the way, when I said most had 8 credits by the end of grade 9, that should read grade 9, and many had 16 by the end of grade 10. So that 16 by 16 is critical. We still must track that and monitor that, but if we were graduating kids at the end of grade 10, we would be at 90% and over, right? It's when kids get after that, they turn 18, they become more vulnerable, maybe they become disengaged, maybe they just have to work. Life gets in the way. As I said, most of them, if not all of some of these students, have their literacy requirements. Community service hours is a really interesting obstacle. Many don't. Many have done community service hours, they've never recorded them. And so when the learning partners go back to the day school and say, he's telling me that he did a lot of work at coaching soccer, at the track meets, they go, yeah, they did. Boy, I'm going to check with that teacher. They did a lot of those hours. And so we can go back and say, you've done a lot of these community service hours, you just haven't credentialed them. We need to help you with that. So where does this take us? So each week we're getting closer to getting that number. So instead of waiting a year, to get the number of where we are for graduation rate. We'll be able to give you that number with great certainty, either at the end of June and certainly at the beginning of September. We're going to know. By the way, also summer semester counts. Okay, so some of these kids we're building into them, they get to June, they can also take courses in summer semester and they can be included in our grad rate. Okay? Am I right on that? Okay, good. Again, this is a pilot project, but we do see this. We don't want to lose some of our momentum for next year. We do want to find a way that we can make sure that we go to the student. We want to go to them earlier than later in the year. And some of the learning that we are doing, we need to push into the day schools and move it earlier. Hitting 86.4%, I think we've got a very honest shot. I think we are tracking that way. I'm excited about working on this earlier next year and giving regular updates at that time. So that's our presentation. We'd be happy at this time, Mr. Chair, to take questions.
Thank you. A lot of information. I want to open that up to comments or questions. Trustee McAllister.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Coombs and Dawes, for your work on this. This, from what I can tell, is much more than a pilot project. It is, it's a great piece of work that I think we ought to be proud of as a board. What we're really showing here to students, and young adults, is that we never give up on them, and I think that has to be our ongoing philosophy. Helping them find a clear path. I guess my question here is, in order for these kids who are, for example, just trying to survive, whatever the reason, are we helping them to access local resources and partnerships and agency work, social services, so that they can get some money, some lodging and whatnot? Are we doing that kind of connectivity as well?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and one of the great things about TR Leger is, number one, you can come in at any time during the year, and number two, they have staff there that engage with community partnerships on a regular basis. We just have to get them back in. And so in many cases, they'll say, I'll meet you at the local TR Leger site, right? And they engage with the administration or the student success staff there, and then we can get them back on that. So TR Leger, and again, I won't go, Superintendent Mills can go into better detail than I can, but certainly they have a lot of these different supports. They rely upon those kind of supports. And in many cases, until we get them back, until we can kind of re-engage them and give them a pathway forward, they're not reaching out for them.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Trustee McPherson, then Trustee McDonald.
Thank you. I think this is great. But basically, you're restricting yourselves to the fifth-year students. What about the ones that are in year 6, 7, or possibly 8? All of whom, if they are under 21, are still technically eligible for day school. So I think this is very refreshing and innovative, but we know that lots of times the thing that knocks a student off the rails for graduation is not simply a one-year phenomenon. It sometimes takes them 2 or 3 years to get back on their feet. So are we going to offer those kind of supports to students that are, say, further down the line for years 6, 7, and 8 potential graduations? Through the chair.
Mm-hmm. Through you, Mr. Chair, I know Superintendent Mills wants to get in here. I can say very quickly that one of the toughest things for our learning partners when they were hired is to be very specific and limit themselves to this number of kids. But for the purposes of this goal, we had to, right? If we were, the 2% is impacts upon this particular role. However, you're quite right. 6th, 7th year, 8th, 9th year, getting a grad rate, getting a diploma is really important. So I do know, Mr. Chair, I know Mr. Mills here wants to get in as well.
Superintendent Mills, would you like to add something?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So Superintendent Coombs and Superintendent Dawes have identified through the work with student success that they are targeting students from the 4th and 5th year cohort. And that impacts directly what the graduation rate that is reported overall as the board to the ministry. That's not to say that we aren't doing a lot of work and putting a lot of resources into our students that are in the 6th, 7th, or 8th through cohort. We would need to come back to you with specific numbers about those students, but a high percentage, a really high percentage, would be at Tierre Léger. You wouldn't have too many students in regular day school and mainstream that would be in their 6th or 7th year that are tracking towards a diploma. We would welcome a visit to a TR site to see the culture of care there and the amount of staff and resources that are there for students to get them across the line.
Thank you. Trustee McDonald.
Thank you. My comment is around, and so similar to Trustee McAllister, our pilot project, and I look at it as more of that continuous improvement. And Superintendent Coombs, you and I have had these discussions about the PDCA and the continuous improvement, and I like the model. I like what's being done, and I think, to echo Trustee McAllister's comments about caring, right? And we're not giving up on these kids. That's an important factor, but moving forward, I hope that we focus more on the preventative measures or the indicators early on, so that we're not trying to find those kids, right? It's not sustainable to try and find the kids in the final year. I think it's more important about strategies that we put in place and the indicators that we do that. So what have you learned so far from this about some of those early indicators that we can kind of keep an eye on moving forward?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So some of the insights, I think, are a couple of technical issues. I guess the first of all is that community service hours are a big stumbling block for kids in get their 5th year, and they've just put it off. And I think we really don't focus on that in our day schools until they get into grade 11. We start kind of bugging them a little bit, going, have you done your community service hours? Have you done, or you've done community service hours and you haven't credentialed them. So that would be a small thing, but it's not a small thing, right? When you get into your 5th year and you get close to that graduation rate, 40 hours actually seems like an awful lot. I think also, although you may get 8 credits at the end of grade 9 and 16 credits at the end of grade 10, that's not the only indicator of wellness and success. Right? So you have a lot of students that can get to that 16 by 16, but they aren't necessarily thriving in the academics piece, right? So either they get into grade 11, and grade 11 can be a bit of a limiter sometimes for some kids, and you know, I think that obstacle, you know, just because a student has that all their credits at the end of grade 10, I think schools at that point can start looking at and saying, you know, where do you want to go at the end of that, and what can we do now to engage you? And I think the specialist high skills major piece is a really big part of that. I think experiential learning, and we'll be learning more about experiential learning over the next few weeks and months and into next year. I think that will be huge, because then you can keep kids engaged in those senior grades in grades 11 and 12. You know, but I think you know, first and foremost, you know, I think that ability to track by cohort will be a big learning from this. And when I say pilot project, I think we are definitely going to continue on. I just can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like. We don't want to fall in love with one particular form. We want to be able to go where we need to go and make it sustainable. But I really see the you know, the opportunity here to you know, to track by cohort starting really early, right? Your cohort in grade 9, they may have left for Tierre Léger or gone to, maybe they've gone from Carleton Place to Almond, but they're still your cohort. And so that becomes then the families of schools, and that's one of our action plans actually, is for families of schools to engage in this conversation. So even if the students left you, their well-being and their success is important to you as well.
Certainly.
And I appreciate that, and I think that's good work. I think there's an opportunity for us to learn from these individuals, right, that we've re-engaged with. We have a lot to gain from their insight. So they've given us some insight, and you've given us that here with student A and student B. But there's some signals that they can share with us, right? So that's an opportunity. And I'm not suggesting that we make changes based on their comments, but it's certainly something that we take into consideration, and it's a focus group that we have. So we're spending this time with them, make sure that we understand
captured some here, right? Family situations and living conditions, those kinds of things. But down the road, I'd be interested to know how many of these kids potentially were in those level 1, 2, and 3 intervention stages that we did have at some point, but for some reason or other, lack of support outside of the school, not inside the school, outside of the school, community support, different things like that we, if we have that information, then I think there's an opportunity for us to also go back and re-engage community partners on some of these instances, because these two in particular, right? There's some communication that we could have had, but there are some community partners that we could have worked with as well to make sure that these kids, I think Trustee McAllister said, had the supports they needed in place. So, good work so far, and I think we're going to see the results of that.
Thank you. Trustee McPherson.
Yes, when you're talking about your 5th year cohort insights through the chair, you identified an area of vulnerability in the handoff from day school, as you term it, to TR Leger. Seeing as you've identified an area of concern, could you perhaps elaborate on what you're doing to lessen that vulnerability through the chair?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, and one of the things that over the past 3 years we've endeavored to do is to make that handoff tighter. So students that leave day schools and that go to TR Leger must be signed off by the superintendent, and there's a review date on that, so that within 3 months there must be a review date on how that child is doing. A lot of times what we're finding, that vulnerability, as soon as they hit 18, that becomes 18 is a risk factor for a 5th year cohort. We're in the beginning of compiling our insights. Again, like I said, we'll have a report with sort of more fulsome insights that we're learning from this. But I do know that any time that the student is between one caring set of adults and another caring set of adults, there is a vulnerability in making sure that they follow through and engage.
Thank you. Student trustee. I was going to give you a superintendent title there.
Through you, Chair. Just a question. I don't know if I'm on the right track or I understand this properly, but when we're looking at the 2013-14 cohort, I think there's 277 kids in between active with UCDSB and transferred or dropped out without a diploma. Are those the students that you're looking at to sort of work with and coach into graduation? And if so, how do you choose from 277? How do you narrow it down, or do you try to graduate them all but really focus?
So through you, Mr. Chair, that's a great question, and that's actually really at the heart of what we did early on, was do a risk assessment of these kids. So there were some students where the principal said, we've got it, they're good, we're going to get them over the line. Others said, they've only got 15 credits, they're not going to graduate, we're going to continue to work with them, but they're not going to get over the line this year. We really tried to find, we called it the Goldilocks zone, right? It's those kids that have enough credits to graduate this year, but we're going to need very specific and personalized support. Again, because of the time restriction of this goal, we needed to do it we didn't have 3 years, we need to get 2% this year. We wanted to make sure that we were working with the kids that could best use our specific interventions at this time. And by doing that, we really focus. And as you noticed, our learning partners, I said we have 70 students currently profiled by our learning partners. All of those can be re-engaged and can graduate by the end of June with interventions. However, that number shifts, right? So some is like, I'm going to hand this child off because they're good. The school's got them, but I'm going to take on another student who have now entered into what I think is the vulnerable sector, and I'm going to work with them. So it's a shifting. There's some shifting sands there, but we did have to do some risk analysis to make sure that we were applying our resources appropriately.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for that. Thank you so much. Okay, moving on is to an action item, and I'm going to put the motion on the table in here in a second. As we all know, we're moving into an election, And there was some legislation, and there were some additions or revised to the legislation. And we, like a lot of boards, have been caught at the last minute realizing we should have had a policy in place. And so it's necessary for us to take a look at a policy. We really want, when we go into an election year, we want all of us to be held at the highest standard as a reflection of who we are as a board. So although many of us, one of us is not running again, a lot of us are. And because of that, it's important that that a policy is created that reflects the high standards that we hold ourselves to. So I'm going to get the motion on the floor, and then I'm going to turn it over to the director. So it's a motion that the Upper Canada District School Board approve the recommended policy 1006, use of school board resources during the municipal and school board election campaign as presented at the board meeting of April 25th, 2018. Now, I need a mover. Trustee McDonald, seconded by Trustee McAllister. Could you guys, just to amuse me, just move those two name tags around? Oh. I mean, I know who you are, but every once in a while I look at the name and go, I was going to... Thank you. I was going to have you move chairs, but I thought that'd be too tough for you. Thank you, gentlemen. It was sort of late in the night to ask for that, but it's been eating away at me, you know. I've just been looking over anyways. Director, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. So before the board tonight is a draft policy. And as you've seen with the landing page report, the purpose of this is to ensure that the board is compliant with revisions to the Municipal Elections Act legislation, which requires that before May 1, in the year of a regular election, municipalities and school boards establish rules, procedures with respect to the use of municipal or board resources, as the case may be during the election period. So our board, as you know, has a posture that it has both a policy orientation and a stance, and in not in all instances, but in some instances, a procedure. And from a staff perspective, bring this forward to you tonight, a draft policy statement that would welcome your comments and as part of your review, and hopefully that the procedure as well provides some type of resonance with what does it mean to go from the positionality of the policy, and what does it look like in action, the how-to or the not to do as part of the procedure. I should also mention, trustees, as well, that OPSPA was instrumental in terms of providing some resources for boards to move in this direction, and some very helpful suggestions in terms of what the policy or procedural statements might look like. So I do know that the staff has referenced that in terms of bringing that forward to you this evening. So, Mr. Chair, I'll turn that back over to you.
Thank you very much. So, trustees, you have the policy in front of you. Would you prefer I read it, or you just want to read it yourselves?
Has a question?
Okay. Well, the policy's there, so everyone's had a chance to read it. Trustee Cram, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not trying to be light of this particular one, but is this policy a one and done? And I'm going to try and go back to my English again. The difference between the municipal election campaign and a municipal election campaign.
Mr. Chair, through you, I think that would be a wise revision to the title, as changing the to and you know, to the question specifically, we know that the Municipal Elections Act is revisited every 4 years, and through that review there may be some other adjustments, but the intention of the policy is to be generic, and hopefully depending on the will of the next government, there may be no changes to the Election Act, and therefore our policy would still stand the test of time. So I note the suggestion, Mr. Chair, about really a housekeeping item of the to
Friendly amendment?
Take it out. Yes?
Friendly amendment, change it to because I really don't want, back up, I think it'll be easier to amend the policy in 4 years from now than it would be to bring in another brand-new policy. That's where I'm coming from to where
Okay,
that.
so we have a friendly amendment on the floor. We're going to address that. Trustee McPherson?
I had my own question, but I want to address his concern. This policy, as it's read, is also to prevent a school board trustee from becoming involved in a municipal election. In other words, if my best friend is running for municipal council, it is not wise for me to use my school board resources to endorse him. Is that the way I read this? Now, the thing I'm concentrating on is the internet. Where I live, I've got the choice between wireless and wireless.
Can you just hold that thought for
Okay.
a second? No, I don't want to stop. I'm going to stop you for a second, but we have a friendly amendment, so I need a mover and a seconder on that to begin with.
Or the mover and the seconder can just agree that that's,
Let me get a seconder first before.
you don't need one if the mover and seconder agree to it.
Don't need it?
I'll just put as amended.
Okay then, thank you. Sorry about that. So it's as amended now? Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, Bill, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Okay, this is more focusing on school board.
Uh-huh.
How would you suggest we handle the internet connections? Like, I have no choice where I live. I have wireless or wireless. During the election process, should we pay for our own internet? Or prorate it? Or simply not make ourselves available via social media?
Normally I don't weigh in on these things, but I will at this point, simply because we have talked about this. There's two options. One is to not put in your expenses for your internets during the campaign period. That to me is a little extreme because you still have board business to do.
I realize.
So my recommendation would you would put in for half. The half that we would use for our business, the other half we just wouldn't put in during that campaign period. But I mean, those are choices. The other, I guess, is the third is that we don't worry about it because you only have one internet source coming into your house. You've got work to do. I think what we want to do is eliminate any public perception that we have an advantage. However, we can't have separate internet services coming into our house. We know that. I threw the three out. Really, there's just the two, but I mean, I'm certainly. I'd love to hear the dialogue on that. To me, there's the two choices.
It comes down to personal choice.
I would say it's a personal choice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything on that? Okay. Any other comments or questions on the policy? Trustee McDonald?
Not so much the policy, I just wanted to make sure the wording, so whether it's an A or a the or whatever, I think it just needs to mirror what the legislation says, so whether it's municipal elections or a municipal election, like as long as it mirrors that, I think that's the important piece that we need to reflect. So other than that, I'm fine with the policy, and I'm happy to vote if there's no other questions. So.
Okay. Trustee Cram.
Just as an aside, Chair, I'm also happy to see that the procedures are here. Not that we necessarily get into the procedures, that's operational side, but it's at least nice to be able to read what the procedures are to go with the policy.
Procedures are pretty clear, aren't they?
Yeah.
I just want to say for this one, I agree.
Yep. Who's right? You got that down?
Well, and the reason is I think we need to understand, right, at some point, because this is impacting us, so we need to understand. So I think that's an important piece.
April 25th. We got an agreement on this one.
9/14.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to call the vote. So we have a motion moved by, I forgot. Trustee McDonald, seconded by Trustee McAllister, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve the recommended policy 1006, use of school board resources during a municipal and school board election campaign, as presented at the board meeting on April 25th, 2018. Cast your votes, please. You're back to yourself now? Okay. Hey,
I'm in favor.
I can't. Just a show of hands, that's not coming up. Thank you. Everyone in favor?
Okay.
I can't get mine. That's fine.
Some came up.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. That carries. Okay. The second that we have is a motion. We all know that Trustee Swan is a little under the weather. We all have deep concerns for her, but I'm sure she's going to be on the mend. In the meantime, she's still in the hospital, and I think it's important that we reflect our understanding of her situation and bring forward a motion to allow her to have the absence from board meetings if required. So the motion that I have before me is that the Upper Canada District School Board approve Trustee Lisa Swan's request to allow her absence from board meetings if required due to medical reasons until further notice effective April 25th, 2018. Do I have a mover for that? Trustee Cartner, Trustee McDonald. Any conversation, questions? Cast your votes, please. Coming up now for everyone? Good. And that carries. Thank you very much. Moving forward, the report of the Special Education Advisory Committee. I'll turn this over to the chair of that committee, Chair Bill McPherson.
Thank you. As usual, we met the first Tuesday of the month in the boardroom at the administration office in Brockville. We had a couple of presentations, one by Debbie Banks, Mary Kay McGeevy, and Jane Bain on a program called Kids Gotta Move. It's very interesting. They're looking at how they can build the principals into the day school kindergarten program, even though the funding ends in June. So that's one for Robert down there. Then we kind of took a quick look at the spec ed education budget overview. Carol McEwen was in attendance. And we talked about the enrollment trends in 14-15 to 17-18. Reviewed some of the changes in the funding formula, and as we already know, the detailed funding is not yet received. We did get some money for capacity building, as was previously mentioned, and we have application-based funding to reduce wait lists for special education assessments. As usual, more details will come. Action items, we talked about our pet project of live streaming our SEAC meeting in June, which is a work in process, but we are moving forward. We hope to have something fairly solid to take to SEAC on the 15th of next month instead of the first Monday or first Tuesday, because we've had to move it. Spec Ed plan, we talked about coordination of services, other ministries and agencies, and very few changes, just spelling corrections and things like that. Director Sliwa, who is almost becoming a fixture at our meetings, was here to talk on engagement on government supports. He's also going to be at the SEAC meeting in May again, and probably the one in June, so we're going to make him an honorary member, I think. Superintendent Val touched upon our suicide prevention training to rural guidance counselors, which is something for the rural schools. The training calls for school administration staff, meetings with our community partners for the autism program, as well as training for our after-school autism programs and our special needs strategies. And they are discussing staffing allocation for next year. And that is our meeting as presented by the chair. And if you have any questions, I'm sure Val is eager to answer.
Any comments or questions, Trustee Kirkner?
Through you, Chair, do you allow for call-ins?
Call-ins?
Yeah, like
No.
we have here? No?
Yes, we do.
Through you,
Yes,
Chair.
yes, we do. No, we don't.
Through you, Chair, yes.
Yes, we
have
do.
members who
We just haven't had any.
Yes, we do. We actually have had.
Oh, you
last
mean a
week.
call-in, like Yes, yes, we do. Sorry, I misinterpreted you. I told you Val should answer it.
All right, so we do. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Thank you very much for that report. Over to the OSPA Director, David McDonald, and I know you were away on the weekend, so I'm sure you got a report for us.
Yeah, I do. I have a report attached to the agenda. It came in late yesterday from OPSPA. So OPSPA provides a summary of our Board of Directors meetings so that we can share. They also provide OPSPA Connects, I think it's called. OPSPA Connects, which also gives you an overview of the OPSPA Board of Directors and some of the things that have happened during the course of the week. So I'll let you review that, but a couple things that I do want to highlight. I shared with Trustee Carpenter earlier, we've got 70-some people in the room, and trying to get a majority of those people on side to talk about one thing or agree is difficult at times. And case in point around policy resolutions. So there were three policy resolutions brought forward by member boards. They're going to be moving forward to our AGM. One of them is around FNMI staffing recommendations from the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board and providing funding and preferred hiring, I guess, is a way to say it, for Indigenous teachers, and then also recognizing Indigenous leaders coming into the schools and not getting an honorarium, but actually becoming a paid person, a paid staff, as opposed to I think what the community expert, I think is the terminology. So that's moving forward. The other one was around performance appraisals for OPSOA members and formalizing that in legislation. That will be moved back to the policy work teams to talk about as well. The other one that we had some difficulty with was around Waterloo and having attention deficit hyperactivity disorder identified as an exceptionality. And the difficulty around that for OPSPA and many was that, not necessarily narrowing it down, and as OPSPA we want to look at broad areas of issues and trying to deal with all students. The request was that we would lobby the minister to do certain things. Through the course of the discussion, there's also something across the province called the MACSI, Ministries Advisory Council on Special Education. So they meet on a bi-monthly, quarterly basis, I guess. And there is a representative from OPSPA that sits on that. So there was some discussion whether we would send it to our representative on MACSI to bring it to MACSI and then have them flow through. The minister is also involved in that quite heavily. At the end of the day, we've pushed it back to Waterloo to have some further discussion because, we want to make sure that we do have some discussions about it, but not necessarily just singling out ADHD. So those will may or may not appear, I guess, at the AGM because they can also withdraw them as we get closer. The final one was a constitutional amendment, and it was a constitutional amendment brought forward by Superior Greenstone District School Board. This one it drew a lot of discussion, and it was really around representation, increasing the number of representatives on the executive board of directors. And their feeling was that there's an underrepresentation of members on OPSPA for small or declining enrollment boards. And they specifically had highlighted small or declining enrollment. And the difficulty with that is they've labeled small as under 25,000 and declining is a decline of 2% or greater. So I don't think we've fallen there, no matter what. The difficulty that I had, and I spoke to it, and I think many had, was that we have an elected body as OPSPA, and we appoint a regional president who comes from a small board. We appoint our executive. We elect our executive, and many of those people have the ability or the capability that they could represent a small board. And I think it also says to me that the people who we've elected in the past have not represented small boards, and I took exception to that because despite the fact that there's someone there from Toronto and there's someone there from, in the past from Waterloo, so right now Limestone, but in the past Waterloo, so larger boards, I think they still represented OPSPA well. And whether it was special needs in areas, whether it's transportation in areas, or whether it's small boards, I think they encompass and are able to articulate the issues that face all boards. So I didn't really want to support this. There's some fine tuning that's going to go forward. We'll see what happens, but at the end of the day, they approved an amendment to this so that it would read only less than 25,000. So even though the intention was for declining enrollment boards, it's now become a small board. In fact, some small boards could be a growth board, potentially. So anyway, I think it's a little odd that we would have that. They wanted to label it a pupil enrollment vice president. It also adds cost to our OPSPA operating budget, and that's not something that we particularly budget on. So moving forward on the budget, we had some discussions around our budget. We did approve our financial statement. Well, sorry, we conditionally approved. We had some feedback come back on our financial statement, so it was a small minor adjustment about how we report the Ontario Coalition. What's it called? OSEC, Ontario, our Arms Length Corporation. That does the energy and all that kind of stuff. So we bring, what's it called? Coalition, Ontario School Boards Coalition. So encompassing those in our financial statements, that passed. We also had a budget that came forward. So the budget, and we also had third quarter estimates. So all, bingo, bango, bongo in succession. We looked at third quarter estimates. I will say that our new ED, Rusty Hick, has done some great work with OPSPA. Looks like we're going to end the year with a surplus. We've made in-year adjustments to minimize some of our expenses and make some adjustments that will potentially offer some more, revenue opportunities. The way that's done is particularly we do a lot of work around provincial initiatives. So the government provides us funds for that. We're allocating those funds and offsetting some of the expenses that we would typically occur at OPSPA. From a budget perspective, we went into the budget with no increase, but then we quickly added to it. There was a motion from the floor that the first vice and second vice salaries or honorarium be increased. Right now, the president gets $26,000. The first vice was getting $8,000, and the second vice was getting $5,000. Those have been increased to $13,000 and $11,000. So essentially a $10,000 increase in the budget, and the staff indicated that there was no issue, no impact on the budget, and they would make adjustments in their other expenses to accommodate that. There are some information that's shared in private, and unfortunately what's shared at private at OPSPA I can't share here, but we can certainly share it at a later time. That is the information, Mr. Chair, for our OPSPA Board of Directors from this past weekend.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? Thank you very much for that report. Director, do you have any comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair. One quick one. As you heard this evening, one of our presentations tonight was around the Director's Work Plan. The Director's Work Plan is a reflection of the Board's own strategic plan and work plan. We're starting our second round of Director Roundtable discussions in the district. Had our first one today with Superintendent Mills' family of schools area, and so principals were asked to bring another staff member from their school, and so we had a great mix of office administrators and EAs and teachers and some vice principals as well, just to give us some feedback about what they're hearing about how the work plan is being implemented, and to give them examples of what we're doing and ask where they're seeing that, or if they're not seeing it, what we should be doing to highlight our efforts to move forward on the 4 goals that we have that reflects the board's priorities. So I was really pleased to have that second round, and we're making some real strong relational commitments to people about what they're doing and how they're doing, and their sharing has really gone to another level as well. So I'm very appreciative of that opportunity, and for Superintendent Dawes and one of our managers in District Alignment, Patty White, who's helping to guide those events over the next 6 weeks. And I do think that it's also that kind of confirmatory evidence that the board asks when we report back to you, but how do you know? When we have different levels of the organization indicating that they see the actioning happening and that they are making connections to their own work, I feel that that's a high buy-in, and it also speaks to what came out in one of the Ipso Reid feedback pieces that the board discussed some time ago, which was about employees feeling valued. And this is one of those examples about that feeling valued, but also being dialed into the dialogue that's going on in and around schools. And our schools are the primary driver for any kind of success that we're seeing in those 4 areas, because they're helping to actualize that, and you multiply that by 81, and you know that we're moving forward, and it's really going to make a difference for how our students are achieving and how our communities perceive our schools. So I'm really pleased to bring that to you this evening and to tell you that we're on the second round of that kind of dialogue, and be happy to share that with you more formally when the next report out comes about the work plan and my checking in with the board on that. So thank you.
Thank you. I have 2 things I want to talk about. The first one, I got thinking today, I was invited to a luncheon up at Luna, and got thinking a lot about legacy and what legacy is. And really, legacy to me is, especially in education, is a measure of your impact and your influence on others. In this room, there were about 60 people that I worked with 40 years ago. All of them were former teachers, former principals, some were consultants here at the board office. I just stood back, and out of the 60 people, I probably knew 55 of them. And every one of them, to me, had a legacy. They were working, hard-working individuals. At the time was Leeds and Grenville, who put kids first. And every one of them I looked at, I can honestly say they put kids first. And as I left there, I thought to myself, coming to a board meeting, you know, they're like a hockey team when you've got your old veterans. And when they leave the team, they're still part of the team. They were still part of who made Leeds and Grenville, and all the other boards that came together to be Upper Canada. They make us who we are. We built on their legacy, and we continue to build on their legacy. And I was so, you know, there's some that were there that I just wonderful memories. Others weren't there because they passed on. But I can honestly say every single person in that room left a mark in education that all of us should be proud of. And I don't want them to think, and I'm sure they're not watching this, it's past their bedtime, but they're never forgotten. The hard work that they do is never forgotten. The second thing that I want to talk about is not pleasant. And you know, as I mentioned in the very beginning, it's hard to explain what happened in Toronto. It's hard to explain that. We know that people were killed. And it's just been brought to my attention tonight. I just want to read this. It's from the Toronto District School Board. It is with heavy hearts that we are learning of the death of a Toronto District School Board staff member, Renuka Armasinghe, whose life was tragically cut short during Monday's horrible events along Yonge Street. She was she was a single mom of a 7-year-old, and there is a GoFund page in support of her son. 7-year-old son's lost her mom. No way to explain to any of us how or why that happened. But it touches home to many, many families, even more so when it's one of ours who belong, you know, because we're all in this together in our school boards. So again, our condolences go to all of those who are affected by this. This one touches one of our school boards deeply, and all we can do is pray it never happens again. Okay. Thank you. I need a motion that the Upper Canada District School Board move into Committee of the Whole, moved by Trustee Bill McPherson, seconded by Trustee McDonald. Just a show of hands, please. Thank you very much. Second motion is that the Committee of the Whole move into private session, April 28th, 2018, moved by Trustee Bill McPherson, Trustee Wendy McPherson, who put her hand up just to get the cord, but you've been picked. Again, show of hands. Thank you very much. And we're moving into
I'm
private
going
session.
to excuse myself.
Thank you.
Because I have perceived conflict of interest in your agenda.